Zora, hopeful. I'm just the girl who delivers flowers on a bicycle. Grayson, haunted. I haven't spoken a word since my brother died 5 years ago. Narrator, intense. This is the moment when a silent billionaire and a garden-loving delivery girl discover that true connection requires no words at all. Zora, determined. You don't need to speak for me to hear what's in your heart. Grayson, vulnerable. You make me want to find my voice again. When the mansion gates open to a girl on an old bicycle, neither of them realizes their lives are about to change forever. But as their worlds collide, dangerous forces are plotting to tear them apart. Can a love born in silence survive when secrets from the past refuse to stay buried? Before we begin this emotional journey, we'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments below. The morning sun beat down on Zora Lane's back as she pedaled her old blue bicycle up the steep hill of Westwood's wealthiest neighborhood. At 24, she had the energy to make these deliveries, but some days, like today with the temperature climbing into the 90s, tested her determination. Almost there, she muttered to herself, standing up on the pedals for the final push. The weight of today's delivery, a carefully wrapped orchid and tea set, made the bike wobble slightly. Zora's curly hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, with sun-streaked strands escaping around her face. Her faded jeans and simple yellow t-shirt were damp with sweat, but she didn't mind. The delivery fees from these wealthy homes helped support her and Aunt Josephine, who had raised her since she was 12. As she reached the crest of the hill, she paused to catch her breath. The homes here were enormous, mansions really, with manicured lawns and fancy cars in circular driveways. Zora checked the delivery slip again. Briarcliff Manor, she read aloud, looking up at the imposing wrought-iron gates ahead. She'd heard of this place but had never delivered here before. Everyone in town knew about the reclusive billionaire who lived inside, though few had ever seen him. Zora pressed the intercom button at the gate. "Delivery for Briarcliff Manor," she said, trying to sound professional despite her breathlessness. Without a word, the gates slowly swung open. Zora climbed back on her bicycle and pedaled up the long, winding driveway. The grounds were beautiful but strangely empty. No gardeners, no staff visible anywhere. The gardens themselves seemed neglected, with patches of weeds sprouting between once manicured hedges. When she reached the massive front entrance, Zora carefully propped her bicycle against a stone bench. She pulled the package from her delivery basket and smoothed her hair as best she could before climbing the steps. Before she could ring the bell, the enormous wooden door swung open, and there he stood. Grayson Locke wasn't what she expected. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed a trim and intense blue eyes that seemed to look right through her. He wore simple dark pants and a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man who hadn't slept well in years. But it was the way he looked at her that made Zora freeze mid-step. He stared at her with such intensity, such focus, that for a moment she wondered if there was something wrong with her appearance. But it wasn't rudeness in his gaze. It was something else entirely. It was like recognition, like he'd been waiting for her, specifically her, for a very long time. Delivery for Mr. Locke?" Zora finally said, holding out the package. Grayson didn't speak. He simply nodded and took the package, his fingers brushing against hers briefly. A jolt of something, electricity, awareness, she couldn't name it, passed between them. Still silent, he opened the box right there, examining the delicate purple orchid and the hand-painted tea set nestled in tissue paper. "Is everything okay with the order?" Zora asked, uncomfortable with his continued silence. Grayson looked up, seeming almost surprised to hear her voice. He nodded again. "You need to sign here," she said, holding out the delivery confirmation. He took the pen and paper, signing quickly before handing it back. His handwriting was elegant but tight, controlled. "Thanks," Zora said, backing away. "Have a nice day." As she turned to leave, she felt his eyes follow her all the way down the steps. She climbed on her bicycle, oddly flustered by the encounter, and began pedaling away. Just before the curve in the driveway, she glanced back. Grayson Locke still stood in the doorway, watching her, the package clutched in his hands. Even from a distance, she could feel the weight of his gaze. The strangest feeling settled over Zora as she rode back down the hill, like something important had just happened, but she couldn't quite understand what. "So you met the mysterious Mr. Locke," Aunt Josephine said that evening as they sat on the small porch of their garage apartment. The space was tiny but cozy, with potted plants hanging from every available hook and fairy lights strung along the railing. I wouldn't say I met him. He didn't speak a single word, Zora replied, sketching in her worn notebook. She was drawing the overgrown gardens she'd seen at Briarcliff Manor, but reimagining them in full bloom. That sounds about right. They say he hasn't spoken much since the tragedy, Aunt Jo said, sipping her tea. What tragedy? Zora asked, looking up from her sketch. His brother died in that boating accident 5 years ago, and that same month his fiancée left him, took off with his business partner if the rumors are true. He shut himself away after that. Hardly ever leaves that big old house. Zora frowned. That's awful. No wonder he seemed so... She trailed off, not sure how to describe the haunted look in Grayson Locke's eyes. The rich have problems just like everyone else, sweetheart. Sometimes bigger ones, because they've got more to lose. Aunt Jo patted Zora's hand. Now, did Mrs. Henderson pay for her weekly flower arrangement? We need to cover the electric bill. Yes, and she tipped well, Zora said, pulling out the cash and handing it to her aunt. I'm thinking of expanding the cake delivery side of things. People seem to really like the lemon cakes. Your mother's recipe, Aunt Jo said with a sad smile. She'd be proud of how hard you work. Zora nodded, her throat tight. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 12, leaving her in the care of her mother's sister. Money had always been tight, but they managed. The delivery service Zora had started 2 years ago was finally beginning to turn a decent profit. I'm going to bed early, Zora said, closing her sketchbook. I've got 4 deliveries in the morning. But as she lay in bed that night, it wasn't cake orders or flower arrangements that filled her mind. It was the image of Grayson Locke, standing alone in that massive doorway, staring at her like she was the first ray of sunshine after a very long storm. 3 days later, Zora was surprised to see an order from Briarcliff Manor pop up on her phone. This time it was for a small cactus, a strange request from a mansion that probably had extensive greenhouse facilities, and one of her lemon cakes. When she arrived at the gates the next morning, they opened automatically as if she was expected. She pedaled up the driveway, noticing again how the gardens seemed to be crying out for attention. As a hobby gardener herself, it pained her to see such beautiful grounds neglected. This time the front door opened before she even reached the top step. Grayson Locke stood there in similar clothes to before, dark pants, light shirt, but his hair was damp, as if he'd just showered. His eyes locked onto hers immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Locke," Zora said brightly, determined to get at least a word out of him this time. "I have your cactus and lemon cake." He nodded, taking the box from her. Again, he opened it right there, examining the small potted cactus and the carefully wrapped cake. "The cactus doesn't need much water, just a sunny spot," Zora said, filling the silence. "And the cake is best with tea, though some people like it with coffee." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but still he didn't speak. He signed the delivery confirmation and handed it back. As Zora turned to go, a sudden impulse struck her. "You know, your gardens could use some attention. I do some gardening work on the side if you're interested." For the first time, Grayson's expression changed noticeably. Something like panic flashed in his eyes, and he shook his head quickly. "Okay, just a thought," Zora said, backing away. "Enjoy the cake." As she rode away, she glanced back again. Just like before, he was watching her leave, standing perfectly still in the doorway of his massive, empty house. "Another order from Briarcliff Manor," Betsy said at the flower shop where Zora rented space for her arrangements. "That's the 3rd this week." Zora looked up from the bouquet she was creating. "What is it this time?" "A pressed lavender bookmark and..." Betsy frowned at the order form. "A pie. Specifically, your apple pie." "That's odd," Zora said, finishing the bouquet. The first order after the cactus had been for a tiny terrarium and some cookies. Now this. Small, almost random items that surely the staff at the mansion could provide themselves. "Maybe he likes your baking," Betsy suggested with a wink. "Maybe," Zora replied. But she wasn't convinced. Something else was going on. The items themselves didn't seem to matter as much as the delivery. When she arrived at Briarcliff Manor the next day, the same routine played out. The gates opened automatically. Grayson was waiting at the door. He took the package, examined it, signed, and watched her leave, all without saying a word. But this time, Zora decided to do something different. That evening, she carefully wrote a note on a piece of her sketch paper. "Hope this plant likes its new castle. Don't forget to water it on Thursdays." She tucked the note into the pot of the small ivy plant that had been ordered for the next day's delivery. When she handed over the package the following morning, she watched Grayson's face closely as he opened it. His eyes widened slightly when he found the note. He read it, then looked up at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Still silent, he nodded once, more deliberate than before, and carefully tucked the note into his pocket. It wasn't much, but it felt like the tiniest crack in whatever wall surrounded Grayson Locke. The next order came with specific instructions: deliver at 5 p.m. instead of the usual morning time. Zora was curious but didn't question it. The late afternoon delivery meant she had to battle uphill against people returning home from work, making the journey to Briarcliff Manor even more strenuous. But when she arrived, something was different. The front door was closed. After a moment's hesitation, Zora rang the bell. No answer. She was about to ring again when she noticed a small envelope taped to one of the columns. Her name was written on it, in the same tight, elegant handwriting she'd seen on the delivery confirmations. Inside was a note that simply read, "Around back, follow the path." Intrigued, Zora left her bicycle at the front and walked around the side of the mansion. A stone path led through an overgrown garden to what appeared to be a small courtyard. When she turned the corner, Zora stopped in surprise. A small table had been set up in the courtyard with 2 chairs. On the table was a teapot, 2 cups, and what looked like one of her own lemon cakes on a plate. Grayson stood beside the table, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. He gestured to one of the chairs, a questioning look in his eyes. "Hi, want me to join you for tea?" Zora asked, astonished. Grayson nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. Zora hesitated. This was definitely not part of her normal delivery service, but something about the hopeful look in his eyes made her step forward. "Just for a few minutes," she said. "I have another delivery after this." She sat down, and Grayson took the seat across from her. He poured tea into both cups with surprising grace. Then, reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to her. Zora unfolded it to find her own note from the day before, but now it had been folded into the shape of a crane. Below her original words, he had written in his precise handwriting, "Thank you for the notes. They make the walls feel less empty." "You're welcome," Zora said softly, looking up at him. Grayson's lips curved into a small, rusty smile, as if he'd forgotten how. He picked up a pen that had been sitting on the table and wrote on a napkin, "The cake is excellent, best I've ever had." "It was my mother's recipe," Zora said, oddly touched. "She taught me when I was little." Grayson wrote again, "Tell me about her." And so, sitting in that forgotten courtyard with the silent man across from her, Zora began to talk. She told him about her parents, about growing up with Aunt Jo after they died, about her dreams of becoming a garden designer someday. Grayson didn't speak, but he listened, really listened, with an intensity that made Zora feel like every word she said mattered deeply. He asked questions in written notes, his handwriting becoming looser, less controlled as they continued. When Zora finally checked her watch and realized she'd been there for almost an hour, she stood up quickly. "I have to go. I'm so late for my next delivery." Grayson stood as well, nodding in understanding. He wrote one last note, "Thank you for staying. Can you come again?" Zora hesitated, knowing she should maintain professional boundaries, but the look in his eyes, hopeful and fearful all at once, made her nod. "I can come again," she said, "but next time, I want to hear your story." Grayson's expression clouded, but he gave a small, tight nod. As Zora walked back to her bicycle, she felt Grayson following at a distance. When she climbed on and prepared to leave, she turned to find him watching her with that same intense gaze as the first day. But now, instead of making her uncomfortable, it made her feel something else entirely, something warm and unexpected that followed her all the way back down the hill. Over the next 2 weeks, a pattern emerged. Every other day, an order would come from Briarcliff Manor, always something small and seemingly random. A succulent in a teacup, a lavender sachet, a different type of cake or pie. And with each delivery, Zora would leave a note, sometimes just a few words, sometimes a sketch of a flower or garden design. She began to look forward to these exchanges, wondering what Grayson would order next, what he might communicate through his choices. On her 5th visit to the courtyard, she found not just tea waiting, but a full meal, clearly catered, but beautifully presented. And beside her plate was a gift, a brand new sketchbook with a set of professional drawing pencils. "I can't accept these," Zora said, running her fingers over the expensive supplies. "They're too much." Grayson shook his head firmly and wrote, "Your talent deserves proper tools, please." That day, he wrote more than ever before, telling her bits and pieces of his life through brief notes. She learned he was 30, that he ran most of his business empire from home through video conferences, that he collected art and rare books, But he still didn't speak aloud, and he avoided any mention of his brother or the fiancée who had left him. As Zora was leaving, he handed her one final note. "You make me want to find my voice again." It was the most personal thing he'd shared, and Zora felt the weight of his trust as she carefully folded the note and tucked it into her pocket. "I'd like to hear it someday," she said softly. "When you're ready." "Fancy Danty-face. You're seeing an awful lot of that Locke fellow," Aunt Jo remarked one evening as Zora sat sketching garden designs in her new book. "I'm not seeing him," Zora protested. "I'm delivering things he orders. 3 times a week? And coming home later and later each time?" Aunt Jo raised an eyebrow. "I may be old, but I'm not blind, honey." Zora sighed. "It's complicated. He doesn't talk. Not to me, not to anyone from what I can tell. We just sit together. He writes notes. I talk sometimes. It's not like a normal, whatever this is, relationship," Aunt Jo supplied, "because that's what it's becoming whether you call it that or not. He's a billionaire who lives in a mansion. I deliver flowers and cakes on a rusty bicycle," Zora said flatly. "Trust me, this isn't headed anywhere." But later that night, as Zora reread the notes she'd saved from Grayson, she wondered if her aunt was right. Something was developing between them, something quiet and careful, built on written words and shared silence. And despite all the reasons it made no sense, Zora couldn't deny the flutter in her chest when she thought about seeing him again. The next week, when Zora arrived at Briarcliff Manor, she found Grayson pacing in the courtyard, his face tense. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately, setting down her delivery. He handed her a tablet computer. On the screen was a gossip website with the headline, "Reclusive Billionaire's New Girl Mystery Woman Visits Locke Estate." Below was a grainy photo of Zora leaving Briarcliff Manor on her bicycle, taken with a long-range lens from the road. "Oh," Zora said, her stomach dropping. "I'm so sorry, I didn't know anyone was watching." Grayson shook his head vehemently and wrote quickly, "I'm sorry, my fault. Should have been more careful. Protecting you." "It's okay," Zora said, though she felt sick at the thought of being dragged into the public eye. "They don't even know who I am." But as she rode home that evening, Zora couldn't shake her unease. She and Grayson had created a small, private world in that courtyard, a space where his silence and her ordinary life didn't matter. Now the outside world was intruding, reminding them both of the reality. He was Grayson Locke, billionaire recluse, and she was just a delivery girl with dirt under her fingernails and dreams too big for her bank account. For the first time since they'd started their strange tea rituals, Zora wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. The next morning, Zora woke to her phone buzzing constantly. Bleary-eyed, she checked the screen to find dozens of notifications. Messages from friends, social media alerts, even a few texts from numbers she didn't recognize. "What in the world?" she muttered, opening the first message. It was from Betsy at the flower shop. "OMG, Zora, have you seen the news? They figured out who you are. Call me." With growing dread, Zora opened her social media apps to find her accounts flooded with comments and messages. Somehow the gossip sites had identified her as the mystery woman from the photo. Worse, they'd dug up everything they could find about her. Her small delivery business, her aunt, even photos from her private Instagram account. The headlines were brutal. Gold digger or charity case. The truth about Grayson Locke's delivery girl, from rags to riches. Inside Zora Lane's plot to snag a billionaire. Sources close to Locke family concerned about opportunistic new friend. Tears filled Zora's eyes as she scrolled through the vicious comments and speculation. People she'd never met were dissecting her life, questioning her motives, even mocking her appearance and her bicycle. "Zora?" Aunt Jo called, knocking on her bedroom door. "There are reporters outside. What's going on?" Zora's phone buzzed again with a new order notification from Briarcliff Manor. But this time, instead of the usual small items, the order simply read, "I'm so sorry. Please come if you can. We need to talk." For the first time since they'd met, Grayson had written actual words in the order form. Zora stared at the phone, tears streaming down her face. She'd been naive to think she could simply pedal in and out of Grayson Locke's world without consequences. Now her privacy was shattered, her reputation under attack, and her simple life turned upside down. She texted back a single word, "No." Then she turned off her phone, buried her face in her pillow, and let the tears come. 3 days passed. Zora stayed inside the apartment, avoiding the reporters who occasionally still showed up hoping for a statement. She'd turned down delivery orders, claiming illness, and spent most of her time sketching furiously in the book Grayson had given her, trying not to think about him or the mess her life had become. On the fourth day, a knock came at the door. Aunt Jo answered it, then called out to Zora with an odd note in her voice. "Sweetheart, you might want to come see this." Zora emerged from her room to find her aunt standing in the doorway, staring out at something. When she reached the door and looked past her aunt, Zora froze in shock. There, standing awkwardly by her aunt's old station wagon, was Grayson Locke. He wore simple jeans and a button-down shirt, his hair tousled by the breeze. In his hands was a potted plant, a small flowering shrub with delicate white blooms. But what struck Zora most was how exposed he looked, how vulnerable, standing there in the ordinary world, away from the protective walls of his estate. This was the first time he'd been seen in public in years, according to the gossip sites, and he'd come here for her. "Mr. Locke," Aunt Jo said with remarkable composure, "would you like to come in for tea?" Grayson looked at Zora questioningly, clearly waiting for her permission. After a long moment, Zora nodded. As he stepped inside their tiny apartment, Grayson seemed to fill the space, not because of his physical size, but because of who he was, the world he represented. He looked around with genuine interest, taking in the cramped but cozy living area, with its second-hand furniture and Zora's garden sketches tacked to the walls. He handed the potted plant to Zora, then pulled a folded note from his pocket. "I never meant to bring chaos into your life. I should have protected you better. The reporters have been warned off legally now. They won't bother you again. But the damage is done, and it's my fault. I understand if you don't want to see me anymore. I just needed to apologize in person." Zora read the note twice, then looked up at Grayson. His eyes were filled with a remorse so genuine it made her chest ache. "I'll make that tea," Aunt Jo said tactfully, retreating to the kitchen. Zora set the plant down and sank onto the sofa. After a moment's hesitation, Grayson sat beside her, careful to maintain space between them. "It's not your fault," Zora said finally. "I knew who you were. I should have realized people would notice." Grayson shook his head and wrote another note. "You brought life back to these walls. I won't let the world take that away." The words, so simple and direct, made tears spring to Zora's eyes again. "I don't belong in your world, Grayson," she said softly, using his first name for the first time. "These past weeks have been like a dream, but that photo, those articles, they woke me up. I'm the girl who delivers flowers on a beat-up bicycle. You." Grayson's jaw tightened. He wrote again, his pen pressing hard against the paper. "I don't care about any of that. You're the only person who has made me feel anything in 5 years." The raw honesty of the statement hung in the air between them. Zora looked down at the plant he'd brought. She recognized it now as a rare variety of gardenia, one that was difficult to grow and prized for its fragrance. "Why don't you speak?" she asked suddenly, looking up at him. "Is it because you can't or because you won't?" Pain flickered across Grayson's face. For a long moment he didn't respond. Then, slowly, he wrote. "After everything happened, words seemed useless, empty, so I stopped using them. It's been easier to stay silent." "But not with me," Zora said. "You write to me." Grayson's eyes met hers, and the intensity of emotion in them took her breath away. He wrote one last note before Aunt Jo returned with the tea. "You make me want to find my voice again. Will you give me another chance to try?" Zora stared at the words, feeling the weight of what he was really asking. Not just for her to return to their courtyard meetings, but to continue whatever this was between them. This fragile, unlikely connection that somehow made sense despite everything. "Tea's ready," Aunt Jo announced, setting a tray on the coffee table. "I hope you like it with lemon, Mr. Locke." As Aunt Jo poured the tea, Zora made her decision. She reached out and took Grayson's hand, feeling its warmth against her palm. "Yes," she said simply, "I'll give you another chance." And for the first time since they'd met, Grayson's face transformed with a full, genuine smile that reached all the way to his eyes. The following Saturday, Zora pedaled up the hill to Briarcliff Manor once more. This time there was no delivery in her basket, just her sketchbook and a homemade blueberry pie. The gates opened for her as they always did, but something was different. As she rode up the driveway, she noticed a team of workers in the gardens, clearing away weeds and preparing flower beds. Several of them looked up and nodded as she passed. When she reached the front of the mansion, she was surprised to find Grayson waiting outside rather than behind the closed door. He wore work clothes, jeans and a simple grey t-shirt, and there was a smudge of dirt on his cheek. "Have you been gardening?" Zora asked, surprised. Grayson nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. He gestured for her to follow him, not to their usual courtyard, but around to a different part of the grounds. What she saw made her stop in her tracks. A section of the garden had been cleared and prepared for planting. In the center was a large drafting table with a chair positioned to overlook both the prepared garden and the spectacular ocean view beyond the cliffs. On the table was a note, "For your designs if you want." "You did this for me?" Zora asked, running her hand along the smooth surface of the drafting table. Grayson nodded, watching her reaction carefully. He handed her another note. "I thought maybe you could start here, with a small garden, if you'd like to." Zora felt a lump in her throat. No one had ever taken her garden design dream so seriously before. Most people treated it as a cute hobby, not a real career possibility. "I'd love to," she said softly. "Thank you." Grayson's smile was small but genuine. He gestured to a stone bench nearby, where he'd set up a simple lunch beside the pie she'd brought. As they ate, Zora's mind was already racing with ideas for the garden space. She opened her sketchbook and began drawing rough outlines, occasionally looking up to find Grayson watching her with that intense focus that had become so familiar. "What do you think about a water feature here?" she asked, pointing to her sketch. "Something simple with river stones." Grayson leaned closer to look, his shoulder brushing against hers. He nodded and wrote, "Beautiful, like everything you create." The compliment made Zora blush. She was still getting used to the way he noticed everything, the way his attention made her feel both exposed and cherished at the same time. "I can draw up a proper plan," she said, "with a list of plants and materials. You'll need to hire a real landscaping company for the heavy work, but I can supervise if you want." Grayson wrote, "I want you to do as much or as little as you want. This is your canvas." "Thank you for believing in me," Zora said, meeting his eyes. "Not many people do." Grayson's expression turned serious. He wrote slowly, "I believe in what I see, and I see someone extraordinary." The sincerity in his eyes made Zora look away, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. To cover her emotion, she returned to her sketch, adding details to the garden plan, while Grayson watched in comfortable silence. Over the next few weeks, Zora's life fell into a new routine. She still made her regular deliveries around town, but 3 afternoons a week were dedicated to Briarcliff Manor and the garden project. The work was a joy. Grayson had ordered all the plants and materials on her list without question, hiring a crew to handle the heavy digging and stonework, but leaving the design decisions entirely to Zora. On the days she worked at the estate, Grayson would join her for hours, helping with the planting and listening as she explained the reasons behind each choice of flower or shrub. He never spoke, but his notes became longer, more expressive, as if the garden was helping him find words again. "These need morning sun but afternoon shade," Zora explained one day, carefully placing a cluster of delicate ferns in a partially shaded area. "They're like people that way. Everyone needs different conditions to thrive." Grayson handed her a note. "What conditions do you need?" The question was simple but profound, and Zora took a moment to consider it. "Freedom," she said finally. "Space to create. People who see me for who I am, not who they think I should be." She looked up at him. "What about you?" Grayson's expression was thoughtful as he wrote, "Peace, purpose, someone who doesn't expect me to be the person I was before." "Before your brother died?" Zora asked gently. It was the first time she'd directly mentioned the tragedy Aunt Jo had told her about. Pain flashed across Grayson's face, but he nodded. He looked out over the half-finished garden for a long moment before writing again. "Lucas was always the voice of our family, the charming one. I was the quiet brother who worked behind the scenes. When he died, everyone expected me to step into his role. I couldn't. You shouldn't have had to," Zora said, placing her hand over his. "You're not him. You're you." Grayson's hand turned to grip hers, his fingers warm and soil-streaked, just like her own. In that moment, their shared work in the garden seemed to erase the vast differences in their backgrounds, leaving just two people connected by touch and understanding. The sound of a car coming up the driveway broke the moment. Grayson tensed immediately, his hand withdrawing from hers. A sleek black sedan pulled to a stop, and a tall, elegant woman in her 60s emerged. Her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, and her cream-colored suit probably cost more than Zora's entire wardrobe. "Grayson, darling," the woman called, walking toward them with a slight frown. "I've been trying to reach you for days." Grayson stood, his posture suddenly rigid. He glanced at Zora apologetically before walking to meet the woman. "And who is this?" the woman asked, her cool gaze sweeping over Zora's dirt-stained jeans and t-shirt. Grayson pulled out his phone and typed something. showing it to the woman. The gardener. The woman raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. Well, the place certainly needs it. Though I would have recommended Henderson's Landscaping. They did the governor's estate, you know. Zora felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Gardener. Of course, that's how she would be introduced. What else would Grayson call her? Friend? That seemed too simple for whatever was growing between them. I'm Zora Lane, she said, wiping her hands on her jeans before extending one. I'm designing a special garden for this section of the grounds. Eleanor Locke, the woman replied, barely touching Zora's hand. Grayson's mother. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Locke, Zora said politely. Indeed. Eleanor turned back to her son. Grayson, we need to discuss the foundation gala. It's in 3 weeks and the board is expecting you to make an appearance this year. Grayson's face darkened, and he shook his head firmly. Darling, it's been 5 years, Eleanor said, her voice softening slightly. Lucas would want the foundation to continue his work, and that means you need to be there. People are starting to talk. The mention of his brother made Grayson's jaw tighten. He typed something else on his phone and showed it to his mother. Fine, Eleanor sighed. We can discuss it inside. She glanced at Zora again. The azaleas should be placed further apart. They'll grow quite large over time. With that parting advice, she headed toward the house. Grayson gave Zora an apologetic look before following his mother. Left alone in the garden, Zora sat back on her heels, feeling suddenly out of place. The easy companionship she'd been sharing with Grayson minutes before had been shattered by Eleanor Locke's arrival, reminding Zora forcefully of the world Grayson came from, a world of galas and foundations and family expectations that had nothing to do with her. She looked down at her dirt-covered hands and worn work clothes. Who was she kidding? She was exactly what Eleanor had assumed, the hired help, nothing more. By the time Grayson returned an hour later, Zora had packed up her things and was preparing to leave. I should go, she said, avoiding his eyes. It's getting late. Grayson looked distressed. He wrote quickly, I'm sorry about my mother. Please don't leave yet. It's okay, she was right about the azaleas, actually, Zora said, trying to sound casual. I should space them differently. Grayson touched her arm, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were troubled as he wrote, You're not just the gardener to me, you know that. Do I? Zora asked softly. What am I then, Grayson? Because I don't think either of us knows what this is. He started to write, then stopped, frustration evident in his expression. Whatever he wanted to say seemed beyond what he could express in a hastily written note. It's okay, Zora said, picking up her backpack. I'm not upset. I just need to think. I'll come back on Thursday to finish planting the north corner. Grayson nodded reluctantly, his eyes following her as she walked to her bicycle. Just as she was about to ride away, he rushed over and pressed a note into her hand. She didn't read it until she was halfway down the hill. You are the first person in 5 years who makes me wish I could find my voice again. That's what you are to me. Soesa, the silent billionaire's mystery woman, has been identified as local delivery girl Zora Lane, Aunt Jo read aloud from her tablet at breakfast. Sources close to the Locke family express concern over the nature of the relationship, suggesting the young woman may be taking advantage of Grayson Locke's reclusive nature for financial gain. Please stop reading that trash, Zora groaned, pouring herself more coffee. None of it's true. I know that, honey, Aunt Jo said, putting the tablet down. But you should be aware of what they're saying, especially if you're going to keep seeing him. I'm not seeing him, Zora insisted. I'm designing a garden for him. It's a job. A job where you come home with that dreamy look in your eyes, where you spend hours sketching ideas just for him, where you bake special pies to take with you. Aunt Jo raised an eyebrow. Sounds like more than a job to me. Zora sighed, unable to deny it. It doesn't matter what it is. His mother made it pretty clear yesterday that I don't belong in their world. And what does Grayson think? He says I'm not just the gardener to him, that I make him want to speak again. Zora traced the rim of her coffee cup. But he's still silent, Aunt Jo, and I don't know if he'll ever not be. Can you build a real relationship with someone who never speaks to you? People communicate in all sorts of ways, Aunt Jo said gently. The question is, does he make you happy? Before Zora could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Miss Lane, this is Eleanor Locke. I would appreciate if you could meet me for lunch today at the Westwood Club. 1 p.m. A car will pick you up. Please be discreet. Zora stared at the message in shock. Grayson's mother wants to meet me for lunch. Aunt Jo's eyes widened. Well, that can't be good. What should I do? Go, Aunt Jo said firmly. Hear what she has to say. But remember who you are, Zora Lane. Your parents raised you to be proud of yourself no matter what. At exactly noon, a black car with tinted windows pulled up outside their apartment. The driver, a polite older man in a suit, held the door for Zora, who had put on the nicest dress she owned, a simple blue sundress that her aunt had helped her alter to fit properly. The Westwood Club was the most exclusive establishment in town, a place Zora had only seen from the outside when making deliveries to the homes nearby. The driver escorted her through the ornate entrance to a private dining area on a terrace overlooking the ocean. Eleanor Locke was already seated, a glass of white wine in front of her. She looked even more intimidating than she had the day before, her silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. "Miss Lane," she said as Zora approached. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit down." Zora sat across from her, trying to appear more confident than she felt. "Thank you for the invitation, Mrs. Locke. I'll be direct," Eleanor said, after a waiter had taken Zora's order for iced tea. "I'm concerned about your involvement with my son. I'm designing a garden for him," Zora said, meeting the older woman's gaze steadily. "Let's not pretend it's that simple," Eleanor replied. "Grayson has not shown interest in anyone or anything since his brother's death and that unfortunate business with Victoria. Now suddenly he's allowing you into his home, working alongside you in the dirt, and according to my sources, actually communicating through notes. Is that a bad thing?" Zora asked. "That he's communicating again?" Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "No, it's actually quite remarkable, which is why I wanted to meet you, to understand what your intentions are." "My intentions? With my son," Eleanor clarified. "Grayson is not just any man, Miss Lane. He's the head of Locke Industries, worth billions, and responsible for thousands of employees. His sudden withdrawal from public life after Lucas's death has been barely manageable from a business perspective. If he's finally emerging from his shell, I need to ensure it's not exploitative." Zora felt her cheeks flush with anger. "You think I'm after his money?" "I think it would be a natural assumption," Eleanor said coolly. "A young woman of limited means suddenly becoming close to one of the wealthiest men in the country. I didn't know who he was when I first delivered to him," Zora said, her voice tight. "And I'm not interested in his money. I care about him because he listens to me, because he values what I create, because when I'm with him, I don't feel like I have to pretend to be anyone else." Eleanor studied her for a long moment. "You may well believe that, but the world we live in is not so simple or pure, Miss Lane. Grayson has been hurt before by people who claimed to care about him." "Victoria, you mean?" Zora asked. "His ex-fiancée?" Eleanor's expression hardened. "Yes, she pursued him relentlessly, convinced him she loved him for himself, not his position. Then when Lucas died and Grayson retreated from public life, she left him for his business partner, took a rather generous settlement with her. I'm sorry that happened," Zora said sincerely, "but I'm not Victoria." "No, you're not," Eleanor agreed, surprising Zora. "Victoria was from our world. She understood the responsibilities and expectations that come with the Locke name. You, Miss Lane, do not, and that makes you potentially more dangerous to my son's well-being." The waiter arrived with their food, giving Zora a moment to collect her thoughts. When he left, she leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Locke, I understand you're protecting your son. That's what mothers do, but I'm not trying to pull Grayson into my world or push my way into his. I'm just being his friend." "A friend who makes him want to speak again?" Eleanor asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, he texted me about you, the first personal message he's sent me in years." Zora was stunned. "He told you that?" "He did. Which is why, despite my reservations, I'm not going to ask you to stay away from him." Eleanor took a sip of her wine. "However, I do have a proposition for you." "What kind of proposition?" "The Lucas Locke Foundation is holding its annual gala in 3 weeks. It's a significant event, raising money for ocean conservation, which was my younger son's passion. Grayson has refused to attend every year since Lucas's death. This year, I've convinced him to make an appearance." Eleanor fixed Zora with a penetrating look. "I want you to accompany him." "Me?" Zora nearly choked on her iced tea. "At a gala?" "Yes, Grayson seems to trust you. Having you there might make it easier for him to face the board members, the press, the questions about his absence these past years." Eleanor's voice became businesslike. "We would provide appropriate attire, of course, and compensation for your time. I don't want to be paid to be Grayson's, what date? Support person?" Zora shook her head. "That feels wrong. Consider it payment for your garden design services then," Eleanor said dismissively. "The point is, if you truly care about my son as you claim, Helping him take this step back into public life would be valuable. Zora considered the offer. On one hand, the idea of attending a high society gala filled her with dread. On the other, she understood how difficult it would be for Grayson to face all those people after so long in seclusion. "I'll do it," she said finally, "but not for money, and only if Grayson actually wants me there, not because you arranged it." Eleanor's lips curved in a small, approving smile. "I believe we understand each other, Miss Lane. Now tell me about this garden you're designing for my son." When Zora returned to Briarcliff Manor the next day, she found Grayson waiting anxiously at the gate. He rushed to meet her as she arrived on her bicycle, his expression a mix of concern and apology. He handed her a note immediately. "I'm sorry about my mother. She told me she invited you to lunch." "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Zora assured him. "Your mother is formidable, but I think we reached an understanding." Relief washed over Grayson's face. He offered another note. "What did she want?" Zora hesitated. "She wanted to make sure my intentions with you were good, and she asked me to attend the Foundation Gala with you." Surprise flickered in Grayson's eyes, followed by something like hope. He wrote, "Will you? I don't want to go, but if you were there." "I told her I would, but only if it's what you really want," Zora said, "not because she arranged it." Grayson took her hand and nodded emphatically, his eyes conveying what words couldn't, that her presence would make an unbearable evening bearable. "Then yes, I'll go with you," Zora said, squeezing his hand. "But fair warning, I don't know anything about galas or foundations or fancy events." Grayson smiled and wrote, "Neither do I anymore. We can be lost together." The simple statement made Zora's heart flutter. Being lost together sounded surprisingly appealing when the person at her side was Grayson. They spent the rest of the afternoon working in the garden, which was beginning to take shape beautifully. The stone pathway was complete, winding through carefully arranged plantings that would bloom in a succession of colors throughout the seasons. A small fountain had been installed, creating a gentle background sound of flowing water. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over their work, Grayson led Zora to the stone bench at the center of the garden. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a formal invitation to the Lucas Locke Foundation Gala, along with a note in Grayson's handwriting. "I haven't been able to face this event since Lucas died. The idea of standing in a room full of people who knew him, who expect me to carry on his legacy, has been paralyzing. But with you beside me, I think I can do it. Not because you'll speak for me, but because you understand my silence." "I do understand," Zora said softly, "and I'll be right there with you." Grayson's eyes shimmered with emotion. He reached out slowly, as if giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek. His fingers were gentle, almost reverent, as they traced the line of her jaw. For a breathless moment, Zora thought he might kiss her. But instead, he simply rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, sharing the same air in a gesture of intimacy that needed no words. The night of the gala arrived all too quickly. As promised, Eleanor had arranged for a dress to be delivered to Zora's apartment, a simple but elegant emerald green gown that fit her perfectly. Aunt Jo had helped her with her hair, styling her curls into a soft updo with a few tendrils framing her face. "You look beautiful, honey," Aunt Jo said, blinking back tears. "Like a princess." "I feel like I'm playing dress-up," Zora admitted, smoothing the silky fabric of the gown. "Like this isn't really me." "Maybe it's a part of you that's just been waiting for the right moment," her aunt suggested. "You can be the garden girl and the girl in the beautiful dress. Both are you." A knock at the door signaled the arrival of the car Grayson had sent. Zora hugged her aunt tightly before stepping outside. Her breath caught when she saw Grayson waiting beside the car rather than inside it. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that emphasized his broad shoulders and tall frame. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard, but it was the look in his eyes when he saw her that made Zora's heart race, a look of pure admiration and something deeper that she wasn't ready to name. He held out his hand to her, and as she took it, he pressed a small white gardenia into her palm, the same rare variety he'd brought to her apartment that day weeks ago. "It's beautiful," Zora said, lifting it to inhale its sweet fragrance. Grayson pulled out his phone and typed, "So are you, more than I have words for." The drive to the gala venue, an exclusive oceanfront resort, was quiet but comfortable. Zora could sense Grayson's growing tension as they approached, his hand tightening around hers. "We can leave any time you want," she assured him. "Just give me a signal, and we'll make our escape." His grateful smile warmed her heart. He typed, "Just stay close to me." "Always," she promised. not fully realizing the weight of that word until it was already spoken. The resort ballroom was transformed for the event, with blue and silver decorations creating an underwater theme. Massive fish tanks lined the walls, and delicate sea-inspired sculptures adorned each table. Hundreds of guests in formal wear mingled throughout the space, their combined voices creating a constant background hum. As soon as they entered, Zora felt the shift in the room. The turning heads, the whispers, the curious glances. Grayson Locke, the reclusive billionaire, had finally emerged from his seclusion, and he had brought a date that no one recognized. Eleanor appeared at their side almost immediately, elegant in a silver gown that matched her hair. "Grayson, darling, you look wonderful. And Miss Lane, that color is perfect on you." Grayson nodded to his mother, his expression tense but determined. He kept Zora's hand firmly in his, as if she were his lifeline in this sea of strangers. "There are several board members who would like to speak with you," Eleanor continued, "just briefly, to welcome you back." Grayson's jaw tightened, but he nodded again. He typed quickly on his phone and showed it to his mother. "Yes, of course Miss Lane can accompany you," Eleanor said, her tone carefully neutral. "Come this way." What followed was a blur of introductions and one-sided conversations. Grayson would nod or shake his head in response to questions, occasionally typing brief responses on his phone. Zora stood beside him, smiling politely, feeling increasingly out of place among these wealthy, powerful people. Most of them barely acknowledged her, focusing entirely on Grayson. Those who did address her directly tended to ask how she knew the family, in tones that suggested they already had unflattering theories. "Zora is designing a special garden for Briarcliff Manor," Eleanor would interject smoothly each time. "She has quite a talent." After what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes, Grayson squeezed Zora's hand, their prearranged signal that he needed a break. She immediately made their excuses and guided him toward the terrace doors. Outside, the night air was cool and fresh, a relief after the stuffiness of the ballroom. Grayson leaned against the railing, his breathing slightly uneven, his face pale in the moonlight. "You're doing amazingly," Zora said softly, standing close beside him. "Everyone is so impressed to see you here." Grayson shook his head and typed, "I hate this." The pity in their eyes, the careful way they avoid mentioning Lucas, the questions about when I'll be myself again. "I'm sorry," Zora said, placing her hand over his. "We can leave if you want." He typed again, "Not yet. There's something important happening later. Something for Lucas." They stood in silence for a few minutes, listening to the sound of the waves breaking on the shore below. Eventually, Grayson straightened and offered Zora his arm, ready to return to the fray. Back inside, Eleanor was at the podium, preparing to address the crowd. She smiled when she spotted Grayson and Zora re-entering. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "Welcome to the 5th annual Lucas Locke Foundation Gala. As many of you know, this foundation was established to continue my younger son's passionate work in ocean conservation." The room fell silent, all eyes on Eleanor. Lucas believed that protecting our oceans was not just an environmental imperative, but a moral one. He dedicated his life to that cause. Eleanor's voice wavered slightly. "When we lost him 5 years ago, we lost not only a beloved son and brother, but a powerful advocate for our planet." Zora felt Grayson tense beside her. She slipped her hand into his, offering silent support. "Tonight, I am honored to announce a new initiative," Eleanor continued. "The Lucas Locke Marine Research Center will break ground next month, providing state-of-the-art facilities for scientists working to protect our ocean ecosystems." Applause filled the room. Eleanor raised her hand to quiet it. "This project would not be possible without the vision and generous funding of my elder son Grayson, who has worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make his brother's dream a reality." All eyes turned to Grayson, who stood rigid under the attention. Eleanor gestured toward him. "Grayson, would you join me?" Zora felt Grayson's grip tighten painfully on her hand. His face had gone completely white. This clearly hadn't been part of their agreement. "You don't have to," she whispered. But after a moment's hesitation, Grayson squared his shoulders and began walking toward the podium, still holding Zora's hand firmly. She had no choice but to go with him. When they reached Eleanor, she smiled approvingly and stepped aside, clearly expecting Grayson to address the crowd. Panic flashed in his eyes as he stared out at the sea of expectant faces. Zora could feel his hand trembling in hers. She leaned close and whispered, "Just nod and smile, that's enough." but Grayson surprised her. He pulled out his phone and typed something, then handed it to his mother. Eleanor read it and nodded, turning back to the microphone. Grayson would like me to express his gratitude for your continued support of Lucas's vision. The research center is a tribute not just to Lucas's memory, but to all of you who have helped keep his work alive. Applause erupted again. Grayson nodded formally to the crowd, then turned to leave the stage, still clutching Zora's hand like a lifeline. They had almost reached the edge of the crowd when a tall, elegantly dressed woman stepped directly into their path. "Grayson," she said, her voice carrying a hint of surprise. "It's been a long time." Grayson froze, his face suddenly expressionless. Zora felt the change in him immediately, a new tension, different from the social anxiety of before. This was deeper, more personal. The woman was beautiful in a polished, perfect way. Flawless makeup, honey blonde hair styled in an elaborate updo, diamonds glittering at her throat and ears. She smiled at Grayson with practiced charm, though her eyes remained calculating. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" she asked, her gaze flicking dismissively over Zora. Grayson didn't move, didn't respond in any way. His face might as well have been carved from stone. Understanding dawned on Zora suddenly. "You must be Victoria," she said, keeping her voice even. The woman's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. "Yes. And you are?" "Zora Lane." She didn't offer her hand. "How interesting," Victoria said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "I never thought Grayson would become so charitable." Before Zora could respond to the insult, Grayson stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of her in a protective gesture. He pulled out his phone and typed rapidly, then held it up for Victoria to see. Whatever he'd written made the color drain from Victoria's face. She took a step back, her composure cracking visibly. "I see," she said stiffly. "Well, it was illuminating to see you again, Grayson. Enjoy your evening." She turned and walked away, her back rigid with what looked like anger or perhaps embarrassment. Grayson turned to Zora, his eyes apologetic. He typed, "I'm sorry you had to meet her. Can we leave now?" "Absolutely," Zora said, relieved. "Let's go." As they made their way toward the exit, Zora couldn't help asking, "What did you write to her?" It seemed to really upset her. Grayson hesitated, then showed her his phone. "I told her that you have everything she pretended to have, kindness, honesty, and a real heart, and that unlike her, you never had to pretend." The words made Zora's chest tighten with emotion. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, away from the noise and pressure of the gala, she turned to face him. "Did you mean that?" she asked softly. Grayson's eyes met hers, more open and vulnerable than she'd ever seen them. He nodded slowly, deliberately, his gaze never leaving hers. In that moment, standing under the stars in a borrowed dress with a silent man looking at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, Zora realized something important. She was falling in love with Grayson Locke, not because of his wealth or his mansion or anything he could give her, but because of the way he saw her, truly saw her, when the rest of the world barely looked. And based on the look in his eyes, she was pretty sure he was falling in love with her too. "Take me home?" she asked, meaning her aunt's apartment, but Grayson typed, "Would you come to Briarcliff first? There's something I want to show you. Something important." Curious, Zora nodded. "Of course." The drive back to Briarcliff Manor was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Grayson led her not to the main house or to their garden, but to a part of the grounds she hadn't seen before. A small, elegant structure set apart from the mansion. Inside, the space was warm and inviting, with comfortable furniture and walls lined with books. But what caught Zora's attention immediately were the paintings, dozens of them, covering nearly every available space. Landscapes, seascapes, abstract compositions, all vibrant with color and emotion. They were beautiful, raw, powerful works that seemed to pulse with life. "These are amazing," Zora said, moving closer to examine one. "Who's the artist?" Grayson stood in the center of the room, watching her reaction intently. After a moment, he typed, "Lucas, my brother." "Oh," Zora breathed, looking at the paintings with new understanding. "He was incredibly talented." Grayson nodded, his eyes sad but proud. He typed, "This was his studio. No one has been in here since he died, except me." The significance of him bringing her to this sacred space wasn't lost on Zora. "Thank you for sharing this with me," she said softly. Grayson walked to a cabinet and opened it, pulling out a large portfolio. He brought it to a table and carefully opened it, revealing dozens of sketches and smaller paintings. He typed on his phone. Lucas was working on a new series before the accident, about people who find beauty in unexpected places. Zora looked through the sketches, touched by the sensitivity in each line. He saw the world differently, she said. Like you do. Grayson's expression softened. He typed, I brought you here because you remind me of him. Not in looks or personality, but in how you see beauty where others don't. How you make something from nothing. I'm honored, Zora said, truly moved. He must have been wonderful. Grayson nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. He typed again, his fingers hesitating over the keys. The night he died, we argued, about Victoria, about the company. I said things I can't take back, and then he was gone. Oh, Grayson, Zora whispered, her heart breaking for him. I'm so sorry, he continued typing. After the funeral, I tried to speak at the memorial service, but the words wouldn't come. They haven't come since, as if my voice died with him. Zora gently took his hand. Grief does strange things to us. That changes us in ways we can't control. Grayson looked at her for a long moment, then typed one more message. Until you came, with your old bicycle and your garden sketches. You made me want to try again. The simple honesty of his words moved Zora deeply. Standing there in Lucas's studio, surrounded by the art of a life cut short, she understood something important about Grayson. His silence wasn't just grief or trauma. It was penance, for words spoken in anger that could never be taken back. Your brother loved you, she said softly. I can see it in his art, the way he captured light breaking through darkness. He wouldn't want you to punish yourself forever. Grayson's eyes met hers, vulnerable and questioning. It's okay to live again, Zora continued, to speak again, whenever you're ready. Grayson stepped closer, his hand rising to cup her cheek. His touch was gentle, reverent. His eyes asked a question his voice couldn't. Zora answered by rising on her tiptoes and pressing her lips softly to his. The kiss was tender, hesitant at first, then deepening as Grayson's arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer. Zora felt the warmth of his body against hers, the gentle strength in his embrace. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Grayson rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. Zora knew, standing there in her borrowed gown in the studio of a ghost, that her life had changed irrevocably. Whatever happened next, her heart was already invested in this silent, complex man who communicated more with his eyes and written words than most people did with endless chatter. I should go, she whispered, not wanting to break the spell, but knowing her aunt would be waiting up for her. It's late. Grayson nodded reluctantly. He typed, I'll drive you home. No need to call your driver, it's not far, Zora said. Grayson shook his head and clarified, I'll drive you. Me. The idea of Grayson personally driving her home in one of his luxury cars made Zora smile. Okay, but no speeding. His answering smile was warm and real, so different from the shuttered expression she'd first encountered at his door months ago. As they left the studio, Grayson carefully locked it behind them, then took Zora's hand as they walked toward the garage. The night was clear and starlit, the garden they'd created together visible in the moonlight. Zora glanced at it as they passed, feeling a surge of pride at what they'd accomplished together. From barren, neglected ground, they'd created something beautiful, something that would grow and bloom for years to come, much like what was growing between them, she thought, something unexpected and fragile, but with deep, strong roots. Jeudi Tour the next morning, Zora woke late, still wrapped in the memory of Grayson's kiss. She found Aunt Jo in the kitchen, reading the newspaper with a concerned expression. Morning, Zora said, pouring herself coffee. Everything okay? Aunt Jo turned the paper around to show her the front page. There, in full color, was a photo of Zora and Grayson at the gala. The headline read, Lock Heir emerges from seclusion with mystery woman. Oh no, Zora groaned. Not again. There's more, Aunt Jo said grimly, flipping to an inside page where a smaller article featured a picture of Victoria. The caption identified her as Victoria Crawley, former fiancée of Grayson Locke, now married to James Harrington, Locke Industries' former CFO. The article quoted Victoria saying, It's wonderful to see Grayson moving forward with his life. I just hope this young woman understands what she's getting into. Grayson has always had issues with communication, even before the tragedy. It's why our relationship ultimately couldn't work. She's trying to make it sound like his silence is why she left him, Zora said angrily. Not because she ran off with his business partner. Rich people and their drama, Aunt Jo sighed. Are you sure you want to be involved in all this, honey? Before Zora could answer, her phone rang. It was Eleanor Locke. Miss Lane, Eleanor's voice was clipped. Have you seen the paper? Just now, Zora replied. I'm sorry about the publicity. It's not your fault, Eleanor said, surprising her. Victoria has always been skilled at manipulating the press, but that's not why I'm calling. It's Grayson. He's not well this morning. Alarm shot through Zora. What's wrong? Is he sick? Not physically, Eleanor said, her voice softening slightly. The gala, seeing Victoria, all the attention, it was too much. He's locked himself in Lucas's studio and won't respond to anyone, not even in writing. What can I do? Zora asked immediately. He asks for you, Eleanor said simply. Or rather, he wrote your name on a note and pushed it under the door. Would you come? I can send a car. I'll come right away, Zora said, but I'll ride my bicycle. The exercise will help me think. After hanging up, she quickly changed into comfortable clothes, jeans and a simple blouse. As she prepared to leave, Aunt Jo touched her arm. You really care about him, don't you? Zora nodded. I do, more than I expected to. Then go help him, Aunt Jo said. But remember what I've always told you. You can support someone through their darkness, but you can't live in it with them. He has to find his own way back to the light. I know, Zora said, hugging her aunt tightly. I won't forget. The ride to Briarcliff Manor seemed longer than usual, perhaps because of Zora's anxiety. When she arrived, Eleanor was waiting at the front door. Thank you for coming, she said, her usual composure cracking slightly to reveal genuine worry. He's still in the studio. He won't let anyone in. Zora nodded and headed directly to Lucas's studio. She knocked gently on the door. Grayson, it's Zora. No response. I saw the paper, she continued. Victoria had no right to say those things. No one believes her. Still silence. I'm going to sit out here until you're ready to open the door, Zora said, sliding down to sit on the ground, her back against the wall beside the door. No pressure. I'll just be here. For nearly an hour, Zora sat there, occasionally talking softly about random things, plans for the garden, a funny story about a delivery she'd made last week, ideas for a new cake recipe. She didn't know if Grayson was listening, but it felt right to keep a gentle stream of normalcy flowing. Finally, she heard movement inside. The door opened slowly to reveal Grayson, looking exhausted and disheveled, as if he hadn't slept at all. Hey, Zora said softly, standing up. Rough morning? Grayson nodded, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. He gestured for her to come inside. The studio was in disarray with several of Lucas's paintings turned to face the wall. Grayson's phone lay on the floor, its screen cracked as if it had been thrown. It's okay, Zora said, understanding his distress without needing words. Yesterday was a lot. Anyone would feel overwhelmed. Grayson moved to a desk and found a notepad. He wrote, I shouldn't have gone. Wasn't ready. You survived it, Zora reminded him gently. That's what matters, and the foundation will benefit from your appearance. Victoria's lies in the paper. Everyone will believe her. No, they won't, Zora said firmly. Anyone who knows you, who really knows you, will see through her. Grayson shook his head, his expression bleak. He wrote again, I'm broken, Zora. Last night I thought maybe, but this morning I remember. I'll never be normal. The rawness of his pain made Zora's heart ache. She stepped closer and took his hands in hers. Normal is overrated, she said. And you're not broken, Grayson. You're healing. There's a difference. He looked unconvinced. Do you know what I see when I look at you? Zora continued. I see someone who feels things deeply, who listens completely, who communicates more honestly in silence than most people do with 1,000 words. Tears filled Grayson's eyes, but he blinked them back. I see someone who's learning to live again, Zora said softly, and I'd really like to be part of that journey, if you'll let me. Grayson stared at her for a long moment, as if searching for any sign of insincerity. Then slowly he nodded. He wrote one more note. Last night, the kiss. I want you to know it wasn't because of the moment or the gala or anything else. It was because it's you. Only you. I know, Zora said, smiling softly. For me too. Grayson's shoulders relaxed slightly, some of the tension leaving his body. He gestured toward the door, a question in his eyes. Yes, let's get out of here, Zora agreed. How about we go check on our garden? Plants don't read newspapers or care about galas. For the first time that day, Grayson's lips curved in a small smile. He took her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers, and together they walked out of the studio into the sunlight. The garden welcomed them with its quiet beauty. New buds were forming on several of the plants, promises of blooms to come. They walked the stone path in comfortable silence, stopping occasionally for Zora to check on a particular plant or adjust a support stake. When they reached the stone bench at the center, they sat down together, still holding hands. The gentle sound of the fountain filled the air, washing away some of the lingering tension. "I've been thinking," Zora said after a while. "I've nearly finished the planting here. This section is done except for some minor adjustments." Grayson looked at her questioningly. "There's so much more of the grounds that could be beautiful again," she continued. "If you wanted, I could design more gardens. Different themes for different areas." His eyes lit up with interest. He pulled out the small notepad he'd brought with him and wrote, "I'd like that, very much. But I can't ask you to keep riding up that hill on your bicycle every day." "What do you suggest?" Zora asked, curious. Grayson hesitated, then wrote, "There's a gardener's cottage on the property, near the rose garden. It hasn't been used in years, but it could be renovated. You could stay here, when you wanted to, for the garden work." The offer was carefully worded, giving her an easy way to accept without implying more than she might be ready for. It was so typically Grayson, thoughtful, respectful of her boundaries. "I'd need to discuss it with Aunt Jo," Zora said. "She depends on me for part of the rent." Grayson nodded in understanding. "But I like the idea," Zora added, watching his expression brighten. "I could stay some nights when we're working on big projects and still keep my delivery business going." Grayson wrote, "We could fix up the cottage however you want. It would be your space entirely." "Our project," Zora corrected gently. "Like the garden, something we build together." The look Grayson gave her was filled with such tenderness that it made her breath catch. He leaned forward slowly and kissed her again, a soft, sweet kiss that felt like a promise. As they sat together in the garden they'd created, the sun warming their shoulders and the scent of new growth surrounding them, Zora felt a sense of possibility unfurling inside her, like a tightly closed bud finally opening to the light. Whatever challenges lay ahead, the press, Victoria's jealousy, Eleanor's concerns, Grayson's ongoing healing, they would face them together, one day at a time, one garden at a time, one silent conversation at a time. For now, that was enough. The gardener's cottage was even lovelier than Zora had imagined. Tucked away near the old rose garden, the stone building had stood empty for years, but remained structurally sound. With Grayson's resources and Zora's vision, the renovation progressed quickly. "This window should be bigger," Zora said one afternoon, standing in what would become the main living area, "to let in more light and give a better view of the gardens." Grayson, who had been studying the architect's plans, nodded in agreement. He wrote on his notepad, "Whatever changes you want, this is your space." Over the weeks since the gala, they had fallen into a comfortable routine. Zora still made her regular deliveries in town, but spent 3 or 4 days a week at Briarcliff Manor, working on expanding the gardens and overseeing the cottage renovation. Some nights she would stay over, sleeping in one of the mansion's many guest rooms, though she always felt slightly out of place in its grandeur. The cottage would be different, a space that reflected her style and sensibilities, with simple, comfortable furnishings and plenty of room for her plants and art supplies. "Aunt Jo is excited to see it," Zora said, walking through the partially completed rooms. "She's already planning what to bake for the housewarming." Grayson smiled at this. He'd met Aunt Jo several times now, and had developed a genuine fondness for the straightforward older woman who treated him not as a billionaire recluse, but simply as the man who made her niece happy. They stepped outside to check on the new greenhouse being built adjacent to the cottage. It had been Grayson's surprise gift to Zora, a place where she could grow seedlings and experiment with plants year-round. As they walked, Grayson's phone buzzed with a message. He checked it, his expression darkening slightly. "What is it?" Zora asked, immediately attuned to his mood shifts. He showed her the screen, a message from Eleanor about a board meeting scheduled for the following week. "They want me to attend in person, first time since Lucas died. How do you feel about that?" Zora asked carefully. Grayson shrugged, his face unreadable. Then he wrote, "Terrified. But it's time. I can't hide forever." "Do you want me to come with you?" she offered. He shook his head, then reconsidered and wrote, "Maybe wait nearby. Not in the meeting, but—" "I'll be there," Zora promised, understanding his need for support without intrusion. "Whatever you need." Grayson's expression softened into a grateful smile. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. These moments of physical affection had become more frequent between them. Gentle touches, held hands, soft kisses, a language all their own that required no words or notes. As they continued their inspection of the greenhouse foundation, Zora couldn't help marveling at how much had changed in the months since she'd first pedaled up that driveway with a delivery. The silent, haunted man who had stared at her with such intensity was still quiet, but his eyes now held warmth, his face more often relaxed into smiles, his body language open and engaged. And she had changed too. The girl who had once been content with her small delivery business and dreams of someday becoming a garden designer was now actively creating extensive gardens for one of the most prestigious estates in the region. More importantly, she had found a connection with Grayson that transcended conventional relationships, something built on understanding, acceptance, and genuine care. "We should celebrate when the cottage is finished," Zora suggested as they walked back toward the main house. "Nothing fancy, just a simple dinner with Aunt Jo. Maybe invite your mother too." Grayson raised an eyebrow skeptically. I know," Zora laughed. "Eleanor isn't exactly the cozy dinner type, but she's been less intimidating lately." It was true. While Eleanor Locke would never be warm and fuzzy, her attitude toward Zora had shifted from suspicion to a grudging respect. The change had become noticeable after Eleanor had visited the gardens and seen the transformation Zora had brought not only to the grounds, but to her son. "Small dinner, just us." Grayson wrote, clearly still uncomfortable with the idea of social gatherings, even small ones. "Whatever you want," Zora agreed easily. No pressure. They had reached the stone terrace behind the mansion, where a lunch table had been set with sandwiches and iced tea. As they sat down to eat, Grayson suddenly froze, his attention caught by something over Zora's shoulder. She turned to see a sleek black car pulling up the driveway, not one of Grayson's vehicles or Eleanor's. A man emerged from the driver's seat, tall and expensively dressed, with the confident bearing of someone used to commanding attention. Grayson's face had gone completely blank, the shuttered expression Zora hadn't seen in weeks, returning in an instant. His body tensed, hands clenched on the table. "Who is that?" she asked quietly. Grayson didn't respond, didn't even reach for his notepad. He simply stared as the man approached the terrace, a practiced smile on his handsome face. "Grayson," the man called. "It's been too long." Understanding dawned on Zora as she recognized the visitor from photos she'd seen in news articles. James Harrington, Grayson's former business partner, and the man who had married Victoria after leaving Grayson. "Mr. Locke is not receiving visitors today," Zora said firmly, standing up. "You should have called ahead." Harrington's smile didn't waver as his gaze shifted to her. "And you must be the famous Zora Lane. The papers don't do you justice." His smooth charm made Zora's skin crawl. She remained standing, positioning herself slightly in front of Grayson. "What do you want, Mr. Harrington?" "Just a brief conversation with an old friend," Harrington replied. "Business matters. Nothing that should concern you." "Anything that concerns Grayson concerns me," Zora said evenly. "And he doesn't wish to speak with you." Harrington's smile tightened. "I understand he doesn't speak at all these days, which makes it all the more remarkable that you've managed to become so close to him. One wonders what the attraction could be." The insinuation was clear, and it took all of Zora's self-control not to react. Before she could respond, Grayson stood, placing a hand on her shoulder gently before stepping forward. He pulled out his phone and typed something, then held it up for Harrington to read. Whatever the message said, it wiped the smile from Harrington's face. His expression hardened. "I see Victoria was right about you. Still as unforgiving as ever." Grayson typed again, his face impassive. Harrington read the message and laughed without humor. "Fine, have it your way. But the board meeting next week won't be so easy to control. Some of us still remember how to run a company properly." With that parting shot, he turned and walked back to his car, his posture rigid with anger. As soon as he was gone, Grayson seemed to deflate, sinking back into his chair with a shaky exhale. Zora sat beside him, taking his cold hand in hers. "Are you okay?" After a moment he nodded and reached for his notepad. "Sorry you had to see that. James was Lucas's friend before he was mine, then my CFO, then Victoria's husband." "What did he want?" Zora asked. "To manipulate me before the board meeting. He wants control of the new research center project. Lucas's project." Grayson's writing was jagged with suppressed emotion. "What did you tell him?" A ghost of a smile touched Grayson's lips as he wrote, "To get off my property before I had security throw him out, and that if he ever spoke disrespectfully to you again, he'd regret it." "My hero," Zora said, trying to lighten the mood. "Though I can handle guys like him. I've delivered to plenty of mansions with entitled jerks inside. Grayson's smile strengthened slightly, but his eyes remained troubled. He wrote, "The meeting next week will be difficult. James has allies on the board, and I can't exactly give a rousing speech to counter his arguments." "You don't need to," Zora said firmly. "Your actions speak for you. The research center is happening because of your work, your funding. The board will see that." Grayson didn't look convinced, but he squeezed her hand in appreciation of her support. "Let's forget about him for now," Zora suggested. "We were going to check on the new plantings by the pond this afternoon, remember?" Grayson nodded, visibly making an effort to put the confrontation aside. As they walked hand in hand toward the pond, Zora couldn't help worrying about the upcoming board meeting. Grayson had made such progress in recent months, gradually emerging from his self-imposed isolation. A public confrontation with James Harrington could set him back significantly, but she kept these concerns to herself, focusing instead on the present moment, the warm sunshine, the beauty of the grounds they were bringing back to life, and the man beside her who communicated more with a touch or a look than most people did with endless words. Suasiumam, the day of the board meeting arrived with a tension that hung over Briarcliff Manor like a storm cloud. Grayson had been up before dawn, pacing restlessly. Zora found him in Lucas's studio, staring at one of his brother's paintings, a seascape with sunlight breaking through dark clouds. "It's going to be okay," she said softly, coming to stand beside him. Grayson nodded without looking at her. He'd dressed impeccably in a perfectly tailored dark suit, his hair neatly combed, his beard trimmed. He looked every inch the powerful CEO, except for the anxiety in his eyes. "Remember, you don't have to speak," Zora reassured him. "Eleanor said she'll present your proposals. You just need to be there." He turned to her finally, his expression vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed anyone but her to see. He wrote, "What if my silence makes them doubt me, makes them side with James?" "Your work speaks for itself," Zora said firmly. "The research center plans, the funding arrangements, they're all brilliant. The board would be crazy to go with anything else." Grayson's lips curved in a small, sad smile. He wrote, "You're biased." "Damn right I am," Zora agreed, straightening his already perfect tie. "Because I know you, the real you, not the silent recluse the papers write about, not the broken man James and Victoria think you are, the man who sees beauty others miss, who listens when everyone else is talking, who builds instead of destroys." Emotion flooded Grayson's eyes. He pulled Zora into a tight embrace, burying his face in her hair for a moment. When he released her, his expression had steadied, resolve replacing some of the anxiety. "That's better," Zora said. "Now go show them what Grayson Locke is really made of." They drove separately to the Locke Industries headquarters in the city, Grayson in his sleek black car with his driver, Zora following in the modest used car Grayson had insisted on buying her after one too many bicycle trips in the rain. She had resisted at first, uncomfortable with such an expensive gift, but had eventually accepted when he pointed out it was as much for his peace of mind as her convenience. The corporate headquarters was an imposing glass and steel tower in the heart of downtown. Zora parked in the public garage across the street, watching as Grayson's car pulled into the private underground entrance. As agreed, she would wait in the building's cafe on the ground floor, close enough to be available if needed, but not intrusive. The cafe offered a clear view of the elegant lobby, and Zora settled at a table with a cup of tea and her sketchbook. She was working on designs for a new section of the Briarcliff Gardens, a memorial area that would showcase some of Lucas's smaller sculptures, alongside carefully chosen plantings. She was so absorbed in her drawing that she almost missed the commotion in the lobby. Looking up, she saw a cluster of reporters and photographers gathered near the entrance, cameras flashing. In their midst stood Victoria, immaculately dressed and posing as if for a fashion shoot. "What is she doing here?" Zora muttered to herself, setting down her pencil. Her question was answered moments later when James Harrington strode through the doors, immediately moving to Victoria's side and placing a proprietary arm around her waist. The couple smiled for the cameras, the picture of corporate success and glamour. "Mrs. Harrington, are you attending the board meeting today?" one reporter called out. "As a major shareholder, I have a vested interest in the company's direction," Victoria replied smoothly, "especially when it comes to the future of the Lucas Locke Foundation projects." "Is it true you're challenging Grayson Locke's leadership of the Research Center initiative?" another asked. James answered this one. "We simply want what's best for the foundation and for Lucas's legacy. Grayson has been removed from daily operations for some time. Victoria and I feel a more hands-on approach is needed. The calculated performance made Zora's blood boil. They were clearly using the press to pressure the board before the meeting even started, and bringing up Lucas, using his memory as a weapon against his own brother. It was despicable. She watched as the power couple made their way to the executive elevators, still trailed by several persistent reporters. Moments after they disappeared upstairs, Eleanor Locke entered through a side door, elegant as always in a tailored grey suit. She spotted Zora immediately and changed direction, approaching the cafe table. "Miss Lane," she greeted, her voice tense. "I assume you saw that vulgar display." "Hard to miss," Zora replied. "They're playing dirty." "Indeed." Eleanor's mouth thinned with displeasure. Victoria has always had a flair for manipulating public opinion, and James knows exactly how to exploit Grayson's difficulties. "Is Grayson already upstairs?" Zora asked. Eleanor nodded. "He arrived early to review the presentation materials. The meeting starts in 20 minutes. She hesitated, then added reluctantly, "Perhaps it would be better if you came up. Your presence seems to steady him." Surprised by the invitation, Zora gathered her things quickly. Of course, whatever helps. They took a different elevator than the one Victoria and James had used, ascending directly to the top floor where the boardroom was located. The executive suite was hushed and elegant, with plush carpeting and artwork on the walls. Zora recognized several pieces as Lucas's work. Eleanor led her to a small conference room adjacent to the main boardroom. Through a glass partition, Zora could see Grayson sitting alone at the massive board table, reviewing documents with fierce concentration. "Wait here," Eleanor instructed. "I'll tell him you've come." As Eleanor entered the boardroom, Zora watched Grayson look up. The relief on his face when his mother mentioned something, presumably Zora's presence, was visible even through the glass. He immediately stood and came to the conference room. "You came up," he wrote, looking both surprised and pleased. "Your mother thought it might help," Zora explained. "I saw Victoria and James downstairs. They brought reporters." Grayson's expression darkened. He wrote, "Using Lucas's memory to manipulate the board. Typical." "Are you ready?" Zora asked gently. He shook his head, then nodded, a contradictory gesture that perfectly captured his conflicted emotions. He wrote, "As ready as I'll ever be. The presentation is solid, but James is persuasive, and I'm—" He trailed off, gesturing to himself with a frustrated motion. "You're Grayson Locke," Zora said firmly. "This is your company, your brother's legacy. You've put your heart and soul into the research center plans. The board will see that." Grayson's eyes softened with gratitude. He leaned down and kissed her briefly but tenderly, then wrote, "Wait here. I'll come find you after." "I'll be right here," Zora promised. As Grayson returned to the boardroom, other people began to arrive, serious-looking men and women in business attire who Zora assumed were board members. They regarded Grayson with expressions ranging from respect to curiosity to barely concealed skepticism. Last to arrive were Victoria and James, still looking like they'd stepped off a magazine cover. Victoria's gaze swept the room and locked onto Grayson with a predatory focus. James moved confidently to a seat directly across from Grayson, clearly positioning himself as the opposition. From her vantage point, Zora couldn't hear the proceedings, but she could see everything. Eleanor called the meeting to order and began presenting, occasionally gesturing to documents that were presumably being displayed on a screen. Grayson sat straight and attentive, his face composed in a neutral expression that revealed nothing of his inner tension. When Eleanor finished, James stood to speak. Even without audio, his charismatic presentation style was evident. He moved with confidence, smiled at strategic moments, made eye contact with each board member. Beside him, Victoria nodded supportively, occasionally adding comments of her own. As the presentation continued, Zora could see the board members' reactions shifting. Several were nodding along with James, looking impressed. Others glanced at Grayson with expressions that seemed to be asking for his response. But Grayson remained silent, communicating only through occasional notes passed to Eleanor, who would then speak for him. It was a cumbersome arrangement, and Zora could see the frustration building on some board members' faces. James clearly sensed the shifting mood. He became more animated, his gestures more emphatic. At one point, he said something that made Victoria place a hand dramatically over her heart, her expression a perfect mask of emotional sincerity. Zora watched Grayson's hands clench beneath the table, his jaw tightening. Eleanor attempted to counter whatever James had said, but it was clear her rebuttal lacked the emotional impact of his presentation. One of the board members, an older man with silver hair, turned directly to Grayson and appeared to ask him a direct question. The room fell silent, all eyes on Grayson. Zora held her breath. This was the moment she had feared, when Grayson's silence would be interpreted as weakness or indecision. Grayson looked down at the table for a long moment. Then, to Zora's surprise, he stood up slowly. He picked up a remote control and pressed a button, changing whatever was displayed on the screen. Even from the conference room, Zora could see what appeared now. A photograph of Lucas, smiling broadly on a boat, the ocean stretching behind him. Grayson looked at the image for a moment, his expression unreadable, then turned back to the board. And then, something extraordinary happened. Grayson opened his mouth, his lips moved, and though Zora couldn't hear him through the glass, she could see that he was speaking. Actually speaking for the first time since she had known him. The board members' faces registered shock. Victoria's perfect composure cracked, her mouth dropping open. James froze mid-gesture. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief and hope. Zora couldn't stand it anymore. She slipped out of the conference room and quietly opened the boardroom door, needing to hear what Grayson was saying. His voice was rough from disuse, barely more than a hoarse whisper, but in the shocked silence of the boardroom, every word carried clearly. "My brother," he said, pointing to Lucas's image on the screen, "believed that our oceans could be saved. He dedicated his life to that mission." Grayson paused, swallowing hard, his voice strengthening slightly as he continued. "This research center isn't about corporate control or publicity or who gets credit. It's about fulfilling Lucas's vision. Nothing else matters." He turned to look directly at Victoria and James. "You both knew him. You know what this project meant to him. Are you really willing to turn it into a power struggle?" Victoria had the grace to look away, her perfect composure slipping for the first time. James, however, quickly recovered from his shock. "Touching speech, Grayson," he said smoothly. "But business decisions can't be based solely on sentiment. The board needs to consider what's best for the company and the foundation moving forward." "Which is exactly why," Grayson replied, his voice gaining strength with each word. "The research center should proceed according to my plan. Not because it was my idea, but because it's true to Lucas's original vision." He pressed another button on the remote, and the screen changed to show detailed architectural plans. "Everything has been arranged. The scientists are ready. The location is perfect. The funding is secured. There is no legitimate business reason to change course now." The silver-haired board member who had asked the original question leaned forward. "Mr. Locke, I must say we're all surprised to hear you speak today. May I ask what prompted this change?" Grayson's eyes found Zora standing by the door. A small smile touched his lips. "I've learned that some things are worth finding your voice for." The room turned to see who he was looking at. Zora felt her cheeks flush as all eyes settled on her, but she held her ground, giving Grayson an encouraging nod. "I believe we should put this matter to a vote," Eleanor said, seizing the moment. "The board has heard both proposals. It's time to decide who will lead the Lucas Locke Research Center project." The vote was taken by show of hands. To Zora's immense relief, a clear majority sided with Grayson's proposal. James's face darkened with anger, while Victoria maintained a tight, artificial smile. "Then it's settled," Eleanor concluded, unable to completely hide the triumph in her voice. "Grayson will continue to lead the project as planned. This meeting is adjourned." As the board members gathered their things, many approached Grayson to shake his hand and express their support. A few cast curious glances at Zora, but no one questioned her presence. Victoria and James left quickly, not bothering with goodbyes. As they passed Zora, Victoria paused briefly. "Enjoy it while it lasts," she said in a low voice. "He'll retreat back into silence eventually. That's who he is." Before Zora could respond, Victoria swept out, James close behind. When the room had cleared except for Grayson and Eleanor, Zora approached them hesitantly. Grayson immediately reached for her hand, pulling her close to his side. "Well," Eleanor said, her composure back in place though her eyes still held wonder, "that was certainly unexpected." "I wasn't planning it," Grayson said, his voice still rough but steadier now. But seeing Lucas's photo and hearing James try to twist his legacy, he shook his head. "I couldn't stay silent." "It was perfect timing," Eleanor said. She looked at Zora with a new respect in her eyes. "So it seems we have you to thank, Miss Lane." "I didn't do anything," Zora protested. "This was all Grayson." "Not all of it," Grayson said softly, squeezing her hand. "Not by a long shot." Eleanor cleared her throat. "I'll give you two a moment. Grayson, the car is waiting whenever you're ready to leave." With a nod to them both, she departed, leaving them alone in the large boardroom. As soon as the door closed, Grayson turned to Zora, taking both her hands in his. "I'm sorry I didn't warn you. I didn't know myself until that moment." "Don't apologize," Zora said, her eyes shining. "Grayson, you spoke, in front of everyone. That was incredible. It felt," he searched for the right word, "necessary. Like if I didn't speak then, everything Lucas worked for would be corrupted." "How does it feel now?" Zora asked gently. "To have your voice back?" "Strange," he admitted. "Rusty, like using a muscle that's been dormant for years." He touched her cheek softly. "But good, especially being able to say your name, Zora. I've been saying it in my head for months." The way he said her name with such tenderness made her heart swell. "I like how it sounds," she said softly. Grayson smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his face. "There's something else I've been wanting to say," he continued, his voice still quiet but steady. "Something I couldn't properly express in writing." "What's that?" Zora asked, though she thought she might already know. "I love you," Grayson said simply. "Not just because you helped me find my voice again, but because you saw me, really saw me, even in my silence." Tears pricked at Zora's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "Voice or no voice, notes or no notes. I just love you, Grayson Locke." He pulled her close and kissed her, a kiss full of promise and newfound freedom. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Let's go home," he said. "We have a garden to tend." News of Grayson Locke's dramatic return to speech spread quickly through both business circles and the local community. The press, always hungry for stories about the reclusive billionaire, clamored for interviews and statements. Grayson declined them all, preferring to focus on the research center project and his continued recovery. For while he had broken his silence in that crucial moment, speaking didn't come easily to him yet. Some days words flowed more readily than others. Sometimes, especially when tired or stressed, he still reverted to written notes. But he was trying, working with a speech therapist Eleanor had discreetly arranged, and making steady progress. Through it all, Zora remained his constant support, never pushing, always understanding when the words wouldn't come. Their relationship deepened as summer turned to fall, marked by quiet evenings in the gardens, weekend trips to botanical centers for inspiration, and gradually, introductions to Grayson's small circle of trusted friends. The gardener's cottage was completed in early October, a perfect blend of rustic charm and modern comfort. As promised, Grayson had given Zora complete freedom with the design, and the result was a space that felt entirely her own, warm, inviting, and filled with light. "It's perfect," Aunt Jo declared during her first visit, turning slowly to take in the open living area with its large windows overlooking the gardens. "Though I still can't believe my niece is living on the grounds of Briarcliff Manor, like something out of a storybook." "A very unexpected storybook," Zora laughed, unpacking the homemade cookies her aunt had brought for the cottage's first official dinner. "The best ones always are," Aunt Jo replied with a wink. Grayson arrived shortly after, carrying a bottle of champagne and a small wrapped package. His face lit up when he saw the cottage filled with flowers, arrangements Zora had created from the gardens they'd built together. "Welcome to the housewarming," Zora said, rising on tiptoes to kiss him lightly. "It looks amazing," he said, his voice warm and clear today. "A good day for words. Like you." Aunt Jo cleared her throat pointedly. "I'm still here, you know. Save the sweet talk for after dinner." Grayson laughed, a sound that had once been rare but was becoming more frequent. "Sorry, Josephine, how are you?" "Can't complain," Aunt Jo replied, accepting the kiss he planted on her cheek. "Though the apartment feels empty without Zora's plants taking over every surface." "You're welcome here any time," Grayson assured her. "This is your home too now." The simple dinner was everything Zora had hoped, relaxed, joyful, filled with easy conversation and laughter. Grayson spoke less than the two women, but contributed steadily, only occasionally pausing to find a word or taking a moment to collect his thoughts. After they'd finished eating, he handed Zora the small wrapped package. "A cottage warming gift," he explained. Inside was a delicate silver key on a chain. "It's beautiful," Zora said, "but I already have the cottage key." Grayson smiled. "This isn't for the cottage, it's for the main house, for all the doors, including mine." The significance of the gesture wasn't lost on either Zora or Aunt Jo. It wasn't just a key, it was an invitation, a commitment, a promise of shared spaces and shared futures. "Thank you," Zora said softly, slipping the chain around her neck. "I'll treasure it." Later, after Aunt Jo had been driven home in one of Grayson's cars, they sat on the cottage's small porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear autumn sky. Grayson's arm was around Zora's shoulders, keeping her warm against the evening chill. "Happy?" he asked, the word a soft rumble against her hair. "Very," she confirmed, leaning into his embrace. "Though I keep waiting for something to go wrong. It all feels too perfect." "Not perfect," Grayson corrected gently. "Real, with all the messiness that includes. I still have bad days, days when the words won't come. And I still have moments of feeling like I don't belong in your world," Zora admitted. "When I meet your business associates or see photos of us in those gossip sites." "You belong wherever you choose to be," Grayson said firmly. "And I'm grateful every day that you choose to be here, with me." Zora turned in his arms to face him. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be." The kiss they shared was gentle but deep, a reaffirmation of everything they'd found in each other. When they parted, Grayson took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "Move in with me," he said suddenly. "Not here, not the cottage. With me, in the main house." Zora blinked in surprise. "But we just finished the cottage. It's perfect." "Keep it," Grayson said quickly. "For your work, for when you need space. But I want—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I want to wake up with you every morning, in our home. Not mine that you visit or yours that I visit. Ours." The raw honesty in his voice moved her deeply. "Are you sure that's a big step?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Grayson said. "These past months with you have been the happiest of my life, even with all the challenges, the press, Victoria and James's schemes. My slow recovery. Through all of it, you've been my constant, my anchor." Zora felt tears prick her eyes. "You've been mine too," she whispered. Yes, I'll move in with you." Grayson's smile was radiant in the moonlight. He pulled her close again, and they sat in comfortable silence watching the stars wheel overhead, both lost in thoughts of the future they were building together. Winter arrived with a vengeance, bringing heavy snowfall that transformed Briarcliff Manor into a glistening wonderland. The gardens Zora had so carefully created now slept beneath a blanket of white, waiting for spring's return. Inside the mansion, life had found a new rhythm. Zora had moved her essential belongings into Grayson's wing of the house, though she still used the cottage as her design studio and occasional retreat. Their living spaces had gradually blended. Zora's colorful throws now brightened Grayson's once austere furniture. Her sketches hung alongside valuable art pieces, and plants thrived in every room. Grayson continued to make progress with his speech. There were still difficult days when words eluded him, when the trauma that had silenced him reasserted itself. But those days grew fewer as time passed, and even on the worst days, he and Zora had developed their own language of gestures, expressions, and written notes that bridged any gap. One snowy evening in December, they sat in the library, a fire crackling in the massive stone fireplace. Zora was curled up on the sofa, reviewing plant catalogues for the spring garden expansions, while Grayson worked on his laptop, finalizing details for the research center that would break ground as soon as the weather permitted. "Listen to this," Zora said, looking up from a catalogue. "They've developed a new variety of rose that can withstand colder temperatures. We could extend the bloom season in the memorial garden." Grayson smiled at her enthusiasm. "Order whatever you think will work. The grounds are your canvas." "Our canvas," Zora corrected, as she always did when he tried to give her full credit for the garden's transformation. Setting aside his laptop, Grayson came to join her on the sofa. "I received a message from Eleanor today," he said. "She wants us to attend the Christmas charity gala next week." Zora looked up in surprise. The annual Lock Industries Christmas Gala was a major social event that Grayson had avoided for years. "What do you think? Are you ready for that?" He considered the question seriously. "I think so. My speech therapist says public settings are good practice, and—" he smiled slightly. "I'd like to show off my beautiful girlfriend." "Show off the delivery girl who rides an old bicycle?" Zora teased, though there was a hint of real insecurity beneath the humor. Despite months of being part of Grayson's world, she still sometimes felt out of place among his wealthy peers. "Show off the brilliant garden designer who's transformed not just Briarcliff Manor, but its owner as well," Grayson corrected, taking her hand. "Who happens to look stunning in formal wear, as we discovered at the Foundation Gala." Zora laughed. "Fine, but I'll need a new dress. I can't wear the same one Eleanor provided last time." "Actually," Grayson said, a mysterious smile playing around his lips, "I might have already taken care of that." "Grayson Locke, Did you buy me a dress without telling me? Zora demanded, sitting up straighter. Not exactly, he hedged. I may have asked Aunt Jo for your measurements and consulted with a designer, but you'll have final approval, of course. Zora narrowed her eyes suspiciously. When will I see this hypothetical dress? It's being delivered tomorrow, Grayson admitted. I wanted it to be a surprise. You and your surprises, Zora sighed, though she couldn't help smiling. Grayson's thoughtful gifts had become a regular occurrence, always chosen with care, always reflecting his attention to her preferences and needs. One more surprise, he said, suddenly looking nervous. I have something else for you, something I've been working on. Another gift? Grayson, you don't need to keep buying me things. Not bought, he clarified. Made, sort of. He stood up and went to his desk, returning with a leather-bound book. It's not finished yet, but I wanted you to see it now. Curious, Zora took the book and opened it. Inside were pages of handwritten text, Grayson's neat, precise handwriting, interspersed with photographs and small sketches. What is this? She asked, turning the pages carefully. Our story, Grayson said softly. From the day you first delivered that orchid and tea set, all the notes I wrote you, the gardens we've created, the moments that mattered. Zora's throat tightened with emotion as she looked through the journal. There were pressed flowers from their gardens, copies of the notes they'd exchanged during his silent period, photographs of the cottage renovation, even a sketch of her old bicycle leaning against the mansion steps. When words failed me, you taught me other ways to communicate, Grayson explained. This is my way of honoring that time and preserving these memories for the future. It's beautiful, Zora whispered, blinking back tears. The most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me. There's one entry I haven't written yet, Grayson said, his voice taking on a strange, nervous quality. One that depends on your answer to a question. Zora looked up from the book, suddenly aware of how serious his expression had become. What question? Instead of answering directly, Grayson slid from the sofa onto one knee before her. From his pocket, he produced a small velvet box. Zora Lane, he said, his voice steady and clear despite the emotion shining in his eyes. You delivered more than flowers and cakes to Briarcliff Manor. You delivered life and color and joy to a place that had forgotten what those things felt like, to a man who had forgotten. He opened the box to reveal a ring, not the massive diamond she might have expected from a billionaire, but a delicate band of rose gold set with a cluster of small stones that caught the firelight like drops of dew. The stones are from places that matter to us, Grayson explained. A tiny diamond from the first garden we planted together, a sapphire the color of your bicycle, a pearl from the ocean Lucas loved. Zora's hands trembled as she looked at the ring, then back at Grayson's face. I once thought I'd never speak again, he continued. That silence was my penance, my protection. You showed me that real connection doesn't depend on words. But now that I have my voice back, I want to use it to ask you the most important question of my life. He took a deep breath. Zora Lane, will you marry me? Time seemed to stop as his words hung in the air between them. All the months of their unlikely relationship flashed through Zora's mind. The silent man who had watched her ride away on her bicycle, the written notes that had revealed his heart, the gardens they'd brought to life together, the voice he'd found again partly because of her. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Grayson, yes, I'll marry you. Joy illuminated his face as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he was beside her on the sofa, gathering her into his arms, kissing her with all the emotion words could never fully capture. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Grayson rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said simply, with or without words, always. I love you too, Zora replied, her heart so full it felt like it might overflow. Always and in all ways. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering Briarcliff Manor in pristine white. But inside, by the warm glow of the fire, two people who had found each other against all odds held on to their own kind of miracle, a love that had begun with silence, but now spoke volumes in every shared glance, every gentle touch, every moment of understanding. And in the garage, carefully preserved under a protective cover, stood an old blue bicycle, the humble vehicle that had carried Zora Lane up the hill to Briarcliff Manor that first day, neither of them knowing it was really carrying her home. News of Grayson Locke's engagement to the bicycle girl, as the press had dubbed Zora, spread through Westwood like wildfire. The story was irresistible, the reclusive billionaire and the humble delivery girl who had brought him back to life. Some versions painted it as a fairy tale, Others hinted at more calculating motives on Zora's part. Few got the real story right. "Have you seen this?" Aunt Jo asked one morning, showing Zora the local newspaper. The headline read, "Lock to wed $1 billion wedding in the works?" Zora groaned, setting down her coffee cup. "They make it sound like we're planning some extravagant spectacle." "Aren't you?" Aunt Jo teased. "I'd expect nothing less than white doves and ice sculptures from my billionaire nephew-to-be." "Actually," Grayson said, entering the kitchen with his tablet in hand, "we were thinking something much smaller, just family and close friends." His speech had improved remarkably over the winter months, with only occasional hesitations or searches for words. He kissed Zora good morning before pouring himself coffee. These casual domestic moments still felt like small miracles to both of them, the easy rhythm they'd found in sharing their lives. "The press will be disappointed," Aunt Jo remarked, accepting the muffin Grayson offered her. She had become a regular visitor at Briarcliff Manor, her practical nature and no-nonsense attitude providing a welcome counterbalance to the sometimes overwhelming grandeur of the estate. "They'll survive," Grayson said dryly. "We're thinking spring, in the garden. The first one we created together." Zora smiled at the thought. "It will be perfect then, all the new plantings will be in bloom." "Speaking of which," Grayson said, sliding his tablet across the table to show them the screen, "the final plans for the research center have been approved. Construction starts next month." The architectural rendering showed a sleek, modern facility built into the coastal landscape with minimal environmental impact, exactly what Lucas would have wanted. The Lucas Lock Marine Research Center would be his lasting legacy, a place where scientists could work to protect the oceans he had loved. "He would be so proud," Zora said softly, squeezing Grayson's hand. A shadow passed over his face, the grief for his brother never entirely absent, but he nodded. "I think he would. It's taken too long, but it's finally happening." "And what about Victoria and James?" Aunt Jo asked bluntly. "Have they caused any more trouble?" "They've been surprisingly quiet since the board meeting," Grayson replied, "but I doubt they've given up entirely. James still has allies in the company." "Let them scheme," Zora said firmly. "We have more important things to focus on, like what kind of cake we want at the wedding." Grayson's expression lightened immediately. "Lemon," he said without hesitation, "like the first one you brought me." "Sentimental fool," Zora teased, leaning over to kiss him. "And proud of it," he replied, smiling against her lips. Aunt Jo cleared her throat loudly. "If you two are going to be all lovey-dovey, I'll take my muffin out to the garden." They broke apart, laughing. "Sorry, Aunt Jo," Zora said, not looking sorry at all. "We'll behave." "Don't on my account," her aunt replied, standing up. "I'm heading to my volunteer shift at the community center anyway. Zora, don't forget we have that cake tasting appointment tomorrow." After Aunt Jo had left, Grayson pulled Zora onto his lap, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Alone at last," he murmured, nuzzling her neck. "We have the meeting with the wedding planner in an hour," Zora reminded him, though she made no move to get up. "Plenty of time," Grayson said, his hands slipping under the hem of her sweater to find warm skin. Zora laughed, turning to face him properly. "You're insatiable." "Only for you," he replied, suddenly serious. "Always, only for you." The intensity in his eyes still had the power to take her breath away. She cupped his face in her hands, running her thumbs over the stubble on his cheeks. "I love you, Grayson Locke. I love you, almost Mrs. Locke," he responded, pulling her closer for a kiss that quickly deepened into something more urgent. The wedding planner would have to wait. Spring came early that year, coaxing buds from branches and drawing green shoots from the warming earth. The gardens at Briarcliff Manor burst into vibrant life, as if nature itself was celebrating the renewal that had taken place there. Wedding preparations were in full swing, though true to their word, Zora and Grayson had kept the guest list small. Just 50 people, a tiny gathering by Locke family standards. Eleanor had initially protested, arguing that certain business associates and social connections couldn't be excluded, but Grayson had been firm. "This is our day," he had told his mother. "We want it to be about family and real friends, not networking." Surprisingly, Eleanor had relented without much argument. Her relationship with Zora had evolved over the months, from cool assessment to genuine, if reserved, affection. The transformation in her son was undeniable, and even Eleanor Locke couldn't ignore the positive influence Zora had brought to his life. One sunny April morning, Zora was in the garden with the wedding coordinator, discussing the placement of chairs for the ceremony, when Eleanor approached. "Miss Lane," she called, "a moment if you don't mind." The wedding coordinator discreetly moved away, leaving them alone among the blooming daffodils and tulips. "Is something wrong?" Zora asked, noting the tension in Eleanor's posture. "Not wrong precisely," Eleanor replied, "but potentially concerning. I've received information that Victoria and James may be planning some sort of disruption for your wedding day." Zora frowned. "What kind of disruption?" "My source wasn't specific, but apparently Victoria was overheard saying she had unfinished business with Grayson that needed to be settled before the wedding." Eleanor's mouth tightened with displeasure. That woman never could accept defeat gracefully. "Should we tell Grayson?" Zora asked, concerned. He had been doing so well lately, his speech almost fully recovered, his nightmares about Lucas less frequent. She hated the thought of Victoria and James bringing new stress into his life. "I've already increased security for the event," Eleanor said. "But yes, I think he should be informed. However, I wanted to speak with you first." "Why?" Eleanor hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Because you understand him in ways I sometimes don't. You'll know how to tell him without setting him back." The admission clearly cost Eleanor something, and Zora appreciated the older woman's honesty. "I'll talk to him tonight," she promised. "Thank you for the warning." Eleanor nodded briskly, her momentary vulnerability already hidden behind her usual composed facade. "The security team will be discreet. With luck, nothing will come of it." But as Eleanor walked away, Zora couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Victoria and James had been suspiciously quiet these past months. If they were planning something now, just before the wedding, it couldn't be good. That evening, when Grayson returned from a meeting at Locke Industries, Zora was waiting in their favorite spot, a small alcove in the library with comfortable chairs facing the fireplace. It had become their ritual to meet there at the end of separate busy days, sharing the events and challenges they'd faced. "You look worried," Grayson said immediately, bending to kiss her before taking the seat opposite. "Wedding stress?" "Not exactly," Zora replied, deciding direct honesty was best. "Your mother heard a rumor that Victoria and James might be planning to cause problems at the wedding." Grayson's expression darkened. "What kind of problems?" She wasn't sure. "Just that Victoria mentioned unfinished business with you." Zora watched him carefully, ready to offer support if the news triggered anxiety. But Grayson merely looked thoughtful. "Interesting timing," he said. "I received an email from James today. He wants to meet to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution to our outstanding issues." "What does that mean?" Zora asked. "I'm not sure. I didn't respond yet." Grayson ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he made when thinking deeply. It could be legitimate. There are still some financial matters being negotiated after his departure from the company, or it could be related to whatever Victoria is planning. "What do you want to do?" Grayson considered for a moment. "I think I should meet with him, hear what he has to say. If they are planning something, better to confront it directly than wait for it to explode at our wedding." Zora nodded, though concern still knotted her stomach. "Do you want me to come with you?" "No," he said firmly. "I need to handle this myself. Besides, don't you have the final dress fitting tomorrow?" "Yes, but that's not as important as—" "It's exactly as important," Grayson interrupted gently. "Our wedding is happening, Zora. Whatever Victoria and James are planning won't change that. I won't let them cast a shadow over our day." The conviction in his voice reassured her. This was not the same man who had once retreated into silence when faced with conflict. This Grayson was stronger, more centered, still healing but no longer defined by his wounds. "Okay," she agreed, "but promise you'll tell me everything afterward." "Promise," he said, reaching for her hand. "No more secrets between us. Ever." The next day, while Zora was at her final dress fitting with Aunt Jo, Grayson met James Harrington at a discreet restaurant in the city. He had chosen a public location deliberately, wanting to avoid both the intimidation factor of his corporate office and the personal territory of Briarcliff Manor. James arrived 15 minutes late, a power move Grayson recognized and ignored. He had come prepared for games. "Grayson," James greeted him with false warmth, "thank you for agreeing to meet. You're looking well. Marriage clearly agrees with you, even before the ceremony." "Let's skip the small talk," Grayson replied evenly. "What's this about, James?" James signaled the waiter for drinks before answering. "Always direct. I've missed that about you." "Somehow I doubt that," Grayson said dryly, "along with many other things you've claimed to miss over the years." A flash of irritation crossed James's face before he smoothed it away with a practiced smile. "Fair enough. We have history, some of it complicated. But that's actually why I wanted to meet." "To discuss our complicated history?" Grayson raised an eyebrow. Seems a bit late for that. To resolve it, James clarified, before you start this new chapter in your life. Something in his tone put Grayson on alert. I'm listening. James took a sip of his drink, then leaned forward slightly. Victoria and I are leaving, moving to Europe. I've been offered a position with an international investment firm based in London. This was unexpected. Congratulations, Grayson said neutrally, but I don't see what that has to do with me. Before we go, we'd like to settle all outstanding matters. Clean slate. James withdrew a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. This is a comprehensive agreement. Victoria will relinquish her remaining Lock Industries shares to you at a fair market price. I'll withdraw my consulting claim against the company. In exchange, you'll provide a statement of support for my new position and agree not to block the transfer of certain client relationships I developed while at Lock Industries. Grayson took the folder but didn't open it. Why now? You've been fighting these issues for months. James shrugged. New opportunities, fresh start. And frankly, your wedding announcement was a factor. Victoria feels it's time to move on completely. I see, Grayson said, though he wasn't entirely convinced. And what's the catch? No catch. Just standard legal language protecting all parties. James smiled. You can have your lawyers review it, of course. I will, Grayson assured him. Is that all? Almost. James hesitated, then added, there is one more thing. A personal matter not included in the agreement. Go on. Lucas's paintings, James said, his expression softening slightly at the mention of his former friend. Before he died, he promised Victoria the Seascape series for her birthday. It meant a lot to her. She'd like to have one piece from that collection before we leave, as a remembrance. Grayson felt a familiar tightness in his chest at the mention of his brother's art. The Seascape series had been Lucas's final work, completed just weeks before the boating accident. They hung in the studio at Briarcliff Manor, precious reminders of his talent and vision. The paintings aren't mine to give, Grayson said carefully. They belong to the Lucas Lock Foundation now, part of his artistic legacy. James's expression hardened slightly. Surely, as head of the foundation, you could make an exception. One painting, Grayson, for old time's sake. Something about the request didn't sit right. Victoria had never shown particular interest in Lucas's art during their engagement. And the timing, right before the wedding, right before their supposed departure, seemed too convenient. I'll consider it, Grayson said non-committally. After my lawyers review the agreement. Disappointment flashed across James's face before he masked it with another smile. Of course, take your time. He stood extending his hand. I hope we can put the past behind us, Grayson. Life's too short for old grudges. Grayson shook the offered hand briefly. I'll be in touch. As he watched James leave, Grayson couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened. Something beyond the surface of their conversation. He tucked the folder into his jacket and called his driver. He needed to talk to Zora. A painting? Zora frowned, setting aside the wedding seating chart she'd been reviewing. That seems like an odd request. They were in the cottage, which Zora still used as her workspace despite having moved into the main house with Grayson. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating her concerned expression. Very odd, Grayson agreed, pacing the small living area. Victoria never cared about Lucas's art. She thought his environmental focus was, quote, limiting his commercial appeal. Could it be genuine? Maybe she wants a memento before leaving the country. Grayson shook his head. My gut says no, there's something else going on. Did your lawyers look at the agreement yet? They're reviewing it now, but even if the legal terms are acceptable, I'm hesitant about the painting request. Zora moved to his side, placing a calming hand on his arm. What does your instinct tell you? Grayson sighed, stilling under her touch. That I should be careful. That James and Victoria rarely do anything without an angle. He looked down at her. How was the dress fitting? Perfect, Zora smiled, allowing the change of subject. The alterations are done. It's ready for Saturday. I can't wait to see you in it, Grayson said, pulling her into his arms. 4 more days, and you'll be my wife. 4 more days, she echoed, resting her head against his chest. Nothing is going to spoil that. Not James, not Victoria, not anything. They stood together in the warm sunlight, holding each other close, trying to focus on their upcoming joy rather than potential threats. But even in that peaceful moment, a shadow of worry remained. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself had decided to smile on the occasion. The gardens at Briarcliff Manor were at their spring peak, a riot of colors and scents carefully orchestrated by Zora's design. White chairs had been arranged in a semicircle on the lawn, facing an arch woven with roses and wisteria. Small posies of wildflowers marked the aisle. It was simple but elegant, perfectly reflecting the couple's preferences. Zora prepared in the cottage, wanting to maintain the tradition of the groom not seeing the bride before the ceremony. Aunt Jo helped her with her hair and makeup, keeping the look natural and fresh. "You look beautiful, honey," Aunt Jo said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Like your mother on her wedding day." Zora touched the simple pearl earrings that had once belonged to her mother. "I wish they could be here." "They are, in their way," Aunt Jo assured her, blinking back tears. "They would be so proud of the woman you've become." A knock at the door interrupted the emotional moment. Eleanor entered, impeccably dressed in a silver-blue suit, carrying a small box. "Zora," she said, using her first name without the formal Miss Lane for the first time. "You look lovely." "Thank you," Zora replied, genuinely touched by the compliment. Eleanor held out the box. "I brought something for you, for the something borrowed tradition." Inside was a delicate sapphire bracelet, its blue stones catching the light. "It was my grandmother's," Eleanor explained. "I wore it at my wedding, and I thought you might like to wear it today." The gesture left Zora momentarily speechless. This was more than just a borrowed piece of jewelry. It was Eleanor's way of welcoming her into the family, of acknowledging her place in Grayson's life. "I would be honored," Zora said finally, extending her wrist. Eleanor fastened the bracelet with surprising gentleness. "He's a different man because of you," she said quietly. "Happier, whole again. I wasn't sure anyone could reach him after what happened with Lucas, but you did." "We helped each other," Zora corrected softly. "I found my path because of him too." A rare smile touched Eleanor's lips. "Then you're well matched indeed." She straightened, her usual composure returning. "The guests are arriving. 20 minutes until the ceremony begins." After Eleanor left, Zora took a final look in the mirror. Her dress was simple but elegant, an ivory silk that flowed to the ground in clean lines, with delicate lace at the shoulders and a modest train. Her curls had been arranged in a loose updo, with small white flowers woven throughout. She looked like herself, only elevated, exactly what she had wanted. "Ready?" Aunt Jo asked, holding out the bouquet of wildflowers and garden roses. Zora took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." On the main lawn, Grayson waited beneath the flower arch, trying to keep his nerves in check. Despite the small guest list, he felt exposed standing before them all, the focus of every eye. His speech therapist had worked with him extensively on his vows, but the fear of faltering at such a crucial moment still nagged at him. "Breathe," murmured his best man, Michael, a childhood friend who had stood by him even during his years of seclusion. "She'll be here soon." Grayson nodded, scanning the gathered guests one more time. Most were friends and family, with a few key business associates who had become genuine friends over the years. His security team was present but discreet, positioned at strategic points around the property. So far, there had been no sign of Victoria or James attempting to disrupt the proceedings. The string quartet began playing, signaling the start of the ceremony. Everyone turned to watch as Aunt Jo walked down the aisle first, beaming with pride. And then Zora appeared. The sight of her stole Grayson's breath. She walked slowly toward him, radiant in her simple gown, her eyes locked on his. In that moment, everything else faded away. The guests, the gardens, even his nervousness about his vows. There was only Zora, coming to join her life with his. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, steadied by their familiar warmth. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "So are you," she replied, smiling up at him. The officiant began the ceremony, but Grayson hardly heard the words. He was too captivated by Zora's presence, by the reality that this extraordinary woman had chosen him, with all his broken pieces and difficult history. When the time came for their vows, Zora spoke first, her voice clear and steady. "Grayson, when I first pedaled up your driveway with a delivery, I had no idea I was riding toward my future. You saw me, really saw me, when I felt invisible to the world. You valued my dreams when they seemed impossible. You taught me that communication goes deeper than words, that understanding can transcend speech." She squeezed his hands gently. "I promise to stand beside you through all seasons, to nurture what we've planted together, to be your partner in silence and in sound. I promise to love you, all of you, not despite your scars, but including them, because they are part of the man I adore. Today I choose you. Tomorrow I'll choose you again, every day for all our days." Tears pricked at Grayson's eyes as he listened. When it was his turn, he took a deep breath, drawing strength from Zora's steady gaze. Zora, he began, his voice low but clear. You arrived at my door when I was lost in darkness. With your old bicycle and open heart, you brought light back into my world. Before you, I believed my voice was gone forever. You showed me there are countless ways to speak, to be heard, to connect. His voice grew stronger as he continued. I promise to listen, not just with my ears but with my heart, to support your dreams as you've supported mine, to tend our garden of love with patience and care, to be your shelter in storms and your companion in sunshine. He reached up to touch her cheek gently. You didn't try to fix me, Zora. You simply loved me until I remembered how to love myself. Today, I give you my heart, my trust, my future. All that I am and all that I have is yours, now and always. There wasn't a dry eye among the guests as they exchanged rings, a simple band for him and for her, the unique ring he had designed with stones from places meaningful to their journey together. By the power vested in me, the officiant proclaimed, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Grayson pulled Zora close, pouring all his love and gratitude into their first kiss as a married couple. The guests erupted in applause, and as they turned to face their friends and family, Grayson felt a peace he hadn't known in years. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The celebration that followed was joyful and relaxed, exactly what they had wanted. Tables had been set up on the terrace, decorated with simple wildflower arrangements. A jazz quartet played soft music as guests mingled and enjoyed the catered meal. Mrs. Locke, Grayson murmured, pulling Zora close as they shared their first dance. How does it feel? Surreal, she admitted with a smile. But wonderful. How about you, Mr. Lane Locke? Grayson laughed. They had decided to combine their surnames, another symbol of their equal partnership. Perfect, everything is perfect. As the dance ended, Eleanor approached them, accompanied by a distinguished-looking older man Zora didn't recognize. Grayson. Zora, Eleanor said. Allow me to introduce Dr. Martin Chen, the lead scientist for the research center. He came to offer his congratulations. Dr. Chen, Grayson shook the man's hand warmly. Thank you for coming. This is my wife, Zora. The pride in his voice as he said, my wife, made Zora's heart swell. A pleasure, Mrs. Lane Locke, Dr. Chen said with a gentle smile. Your husband has told me about your remarkable garden designs. Perhaps you might consider consulting on the center's coastal restoration project. I'd be honored, Zora replied, genuinely intrigued by the idea, though I'm still learning about coastal ecosystems. As are we all, Dr. Chen said kindly. The ocean keeps her secrets well. They chatted for a few more minutes about the research center's progress before Dr. Chen excused himself to speak with other guests. As he moved away, Grayson noticed one of his security personnel hovering nearby, clearly waiting to speak with him. Excuse me a moment, he said to Zora and Eleanor. I should see what this is about. As Grayson stepped aside with the security guard, Eleanor turned to Zora. The ceremony was lovely, simple but meaningful. Thank you, Zora said, and thank you again for the bracelet. It means a lot to me. Eleanor nodded, her expression softening slightly. You've brought something special to this family, Zora, something we needed. Before Zora could respond to this unprecedented admission, Grayson returned, his expression troubled. What is it? Zora asked immediately. Security spotted James's car parked just outside the property, Grayson said in a low voice, but there's no sign of him or Victoria among the guests. Eleanor frowned. Could they have been invited by someone else? Unlikely, Grayson replied. The guest list was too small and carefully managed. A sudden thought struck Zora. The paintings, she gasped. Lucas's studio. Everyone's here at the reception. The house is practically empty. Understanding dawned on Grayson's face. They wouldn't, but even as he said it, he knew they would. With everyone focused on the wedding celebration, the main house, including Lucas's studio, was vulnerable. I need to check, he said urgently. Stay here with the guests. I'm coming with you, Zora insisted, already gathering her dress to allow for quicker movement. As am I, Eleanor added firmly. Grayson knew better than to argue with either woman. Johnson, he called to the security guard, get 2 more men and come with us to the house, discreetly. They made their way back to the mansion, trying not to draw attention from the celebrating guests. As they approached Lucas's studio, they could see the door was ajar, a door Grayson always kept locked. The security guards moved ahead, entering first to ensure safety. Clear, one called after a moment. But you should see this, sir. Grayson, Zora, and Eleanor entered to find the studio in disarray. Several paintings had been removed from the walls, leaving conspicuous empty spaces. Drawers stood open, their contents disturbed. "The seascapes," Grayson said, his voice tight with anger and grief. "They're gone. All 6 of them." "Not quite all," came a voice from the doorway. They turned to see Victoria standing there, elegant in a designer dress holding one of Lucas's paintings, the centerpiece of the Seascape series, a stunning depiction of dawn breaking over turbulent waters. "I thought you might come looking for these," she said, her voice falsely sweet. "Consider this one a wedding gift." "Where are the others?" Grayson demanded, stepping toward her. "Safe," Victoria replied, "with James. Probably halfway to our private storage facility by now." "Those paintings belong to the Foundation," Eleanor said coldly. "This is theft," Victoria laughed. "Is it? I have documentation proving Lucas promised them to me before he died, a gift that was never delivered due to his unfortunate accident." "Documentation you forged," Grayson said, his voice steady despite his rising anger. "Lucas would never have given you those paintings. He knew exactly who you were, even before I did." Something ugly flashed in Victoria's eyes. "You never did forgive, did you, Grayson? Always holding on to grudges, hiding away in your mansion, playing the wounded victim. It was pathetic." "Why now?" Zora asked, placing a restraining hand on Grayson's arm. "Why steal the paintings on our wedding day?" "Timing," Victoria shrugged. "With everyone distracted by the ceremony, it was the perfect opportunity, and," she smiled maliciously, "I wanted you to remember me on your special day. To know that I could still reach you, still hurt you if I wanted to." "You're sick," Eleanor said with disgust. "I'm practical," Victoria countered. "These paintings are worth millions now that Lucas is gone, more than enough to fund our new life abroad." "You won't get away with this," Grayson said quietly. "The paintings are registered with international art authorities. They can't be sold publicly." "Who said anything about a public sale?" Victoria smirked. "There are plenty of private collectors who don't ask questions about provenance." Grayson took a step toward her, but before he could speak, Zora moved forward. "Give us the painting, Victoria," she said calmly. "Walk away now, and maybe we won't press charges." Victoria's eyes narrowed as she assessed Zora, the bicycle girl. "I have to hand it to you. You've played your cards well, from delivering flowers to marrying billions in less than a year. Impressive hustle." "You don't know anything about us," Zora replied, refusing to be baited. "Or about real love. That's why you can't understand why Grayson chose me. It's not about money or status or power. It's about finding someone who sees you completely and loves you anyway." Victoria's composure slipped for a moment, revealing a flash of genuine hurt before the mask slid back into place. "How touching, but I'll be keeping this painting as a souvenir." She turned to leave, the canvas clutched in her manicured hands. "Actually, you won't," came a new voice from the hallway. James appeared, flanked by 2 police officers. His expression was grim, defeated. "James?" Victoria's voice rose in confusion. "What are you doing? Where are the other paintings?" "Still in their frames, Victoria," he replied wearily. "I couldn't go through with it." "What are you talking about?" she hissed. "We had a plan." "Your plan," James corrected. "To steal from a dead man who was once my friend, to hurt his brother on his wedding day out of petty revenge." He shook his head. "I've done a lot of things I'm not proud of, but this was too far." The police officers stepped forward. "Mrs. Harrington, please put down the artwork," one said firmly. "You're being detained on suspicion of attempted theft." Victoria's face contorted with rage as she realized what was happening. "You betrayed me," she spat at James. "After everything we've been through together." "I betrayed myself first," James said quietly, "by following you down this path. It's over, Victoria." As the officers moved to take the painting and escort Victoria from the room, she turned one last venomous look at Grayson and Zora. "This isn't over," she threatened. "You haven't heard the last from me." "Actually, I think we have," Grayson replied calmly. "Goodbye, Victoria." After the police had taken Victoria away, James remained, looking uncomfortable but determined. "I'm sorry," he said to Grayson, "for everything, not just today, but all of it. Lucas would be ashamed of what I've become." Grayson studied his former friend and business partner for a long moment. "Why did you stop her? Why come to us instead?" James sighed heavily. "When I saw the security arrangements for your wedding, how careful you were being without making a show of it, I realized you suspected something. Then I saw how happy you were with Zora during the ceremony. Genuinely happy, not just putting on a face like Victoria, and I have been doing for years." He shook his head. "Something broke inside me. I couldn't be part of hurting you again. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them before Grayson finally spoke. Thank you for stopping her. For saving Lucas's paintings. It doesn't make up for the past, James acknowledged. No, Grayson agreed. It doesn't, but it's something. James nodded, accepting this limited forgiveness as more than he deserved. I should go. I have a statement to give to the police. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, congratulations. You found someone real. That's rare. After he left, Grayson, Zora, and Eleanor stood in silence for a moment, processing what had just happened. The studio, with its disturbed furniture and empty wall spaces where paintings had been temporarily removed, seemed to reflect the violation they all felt. We should get back to the reception, Eleanor said finally. People will be wondering where you've gone. In a minute, Grayson replied, moving to a storage cabinet in the corner. He unlocked it and carefully withdrew a package wrapped in protective cloth. First, I want to give Zora her wedding gift. Zora looked at him in surprise. Now? After all this? Especially now, Grayson said firmly. This day is about us, not them. They've taken enough moments from my life. They don't get to take this one too. He handed her the package. Curious, Zora unwrapped it to reveal a painting, one she had never seen before. It showed a young woman on a blue bicycle, pedaling up a winding drive toward a grand house on a hill. The style was unmistakably Lucas's, but the subject was impossible. Lucas had died years before Zora ever came to Briarcliff Manor. I don't understand, she said, looking up at Grayson in confusion. How? I painted it, Grayson admitted, using Lucas's materials, studying his techniques. I've been working on it for months in secret. Zora stared at the painting in amazement. The quality was remarkable. Not quite Lucas's level of mastery, but extraordinarily skilled nonetheless. I had no idea you could paint like this. Neither did I, Grayson said with a small smile. But I watched Lucas for years, and lately I felt connected to him again, as if by using his brushes, his paints, I could channel something of his spirit. It's beautiful, Zora whispered, touching the canvas gently. Our beginning, the first chapter of many, Grayson agreed, pulling her close. I wanted to capture the moment that changed everything for me, when you arrived at the mansion on that old bicycle. Eleanor, who had been examining the painting with undisguised emotion, cleared her throat. It's remarkable, Grayson. Lucas would be proud. She moved toward the door. I'll tell the guests you'll be back shortly. Take your time. Left alone in the studio, surrounded by the artistic legacy of the brother Grayson had lost and the new legacy they were creating together, Zora and Grayson held each other close. Some wedding day, Zora murmured against his chest. Theft, police, confrontations. Grayson chuckled softly. Would you expect anything less from the Locke family? We never do anything halfway. The Lane Locke family now, Zora corrected, looking up at him with a smile. And I wouldn't change a thing. Well, maybe the theft part. No, Grayson agreed, becoming serious. But in a strange way, I'm almost grateful. Victoria and James's final scheme brought something unexpected. Closure. James's apology might not make up for everything, but it's an ending of sorts. A chance to truly move forward. Together, Zora added, stretching up to kiss him softly. Together, Grayson echoed against her lips. Always together. Boissy Fueris. Epilogue. 1 year later, the Lucas Locke Marine Research Center gleamed in the summer sunlight, its eco-friendly design blending harmoniously with the coastal landscape. From the observation deck, Zora watched as Grayson cut the ribbon at the main entrance, officially opening the facility to thunderous applause from the gathered crowd. Today, we fulfill a promise, Grayson said, his voice strong and clear, carrying across the assembled scientists, donors, and press. A promise to my brother Lucas, whose vision made this possible, a promise to our oceans which sustain all life on Earth, and a promise to future generations who deserve to inherit healthy seas teeming with life. Pride swelled in Zora's heart as she listened to her husband speak. In the year since their wedding, Grayson had continued to flourish, his confidence growing alongside his comfort with public speaking. The research center had become his passion project, a way to honor Lucas while making a genuine difference in the world. As Grayson finished his speech and the crowd moved inside for tours, he joined Zora on the observation deck, slipping an arm around her expanding waistline. How's our little environmentalist doing today? He asked, gently rubbing her 7 months pregnant belly. Active, Zora laughed. I think he or she was applauding your speech too. Grayson smiled, bending to speak directly to her stomach. Did you hear that, baby? Your daddy just opened a big important building. But don't worry, you're still the most important project we've ever worked on. Zora ran her fingers through his hair affectionately. The speech was perfect. Lucas would be so proud of what you've accomplished. What we've accomplished, Grayson corrected, straightening up. The coastal restoration gardens were your design. The scientists are already amazed at how quickly the native plants are establishing. It was true. Zora had found an unexpected calling in ecological restoration, combining her garden design skills with environmental science to create landscapes that healed damaged ecosystems. The gardens surrounding the research center were her first major project of this kind, but offers from other conservation organizations were already coming in. Speaking of gardens, Grayson said, how are the renovations at the cottage coming along? They had decided to convert the gardener's cottage into a nursery and children's garden, a special place where their child could grow up connected to nature. The main house was still their primary residence, but the cottage would be a whimsical retreat just for their expanding family. Almost finished, Zora replied. Aunt Jo has been supervising while I've been waddling around like a duck. The murals are being completed this week. Perfect timing, Grayson said. And how about you, not overdoing it, I hope? Zora gave him a look. Says the man who worked 18-hour days to get this place ready for the opening. Touché, Grayson acknowledged with a grin. We're quite a pair, aren't we? The best kind, Zora agreed, leaning into his embrace as they looked out over the ocean. Partners in everything. From this vantage point, they could see far into the distance, the endless blue horizon where sky met sea, full of possibility and promise. Behind them stood the research center, Lucas's legacy made real. Before them stretched the future they were building together, one day, one project, one dream at a time. And somewhere in the garage at Briarcliff Manor, carefully preserved and occasionally brought out for sentimental rides around the estate, stood an old blue bicycle, the humble vehicle that had carried Zora Lane up the hill to a mansion, a complicated man, and the love of her life. As if reading her thoughts, Grayson pressed a kiss to her temple. Best delivery you ever made, he murmured. Best one I ever will make, Zora replied, placing his hand over the spot where their baby had just kicked. Except maybe this one. They stood together in the warm sunshine, the man who had found his voice again, and the woman who had heard him even in his silence, watching the waves roll endlessly toward the shore, each one unique, yet part of the same vast, beautiful, ever-changing sea, just like the chapters of their unexpected, imperfect, wonderful life together. The end.